Hello, Night Seekers. Welcome to Black Screen Horror. Relax, close your eyes, and enjoy tonight's true scary stories with gentle rain. Ads may play during the first 15 minutes, with no mid-roll ads after that. The house on Larch Street was the first house my parents ever owned outright. A two-story colonial with faded green shutters and a front yard just barely big enough for a swing set. And it was also the house where I would spend the worst year of my childhood without ever fully understanding, until much later, exactly what had been living in it alongside us. 2 weeks before we moved, my dad took me to walk through it one last time before the papers were signed. I was 10, and I mostly cared about which room would be mine. So I ran ahead of him down the basement stairs to look at the space my mom said could be a playroom someday. That was where I first saw the man kneeling in front of the water heater with a small can of paint and a brush, going over the metal casing in slow, careful strokes, even though the tank looked practically brand new to me. I remember thinking it was strange, because you don't usually paint a water heater, and this one didn't look old or rusted or scratched up in any way that needed covering. My dad asked him about it, half joking, and the man just said the sellers wanted everything looking fresh for the new owners, and left it at that. My dad shrugged, and we went back upstairs to look at the kitchen cabinets. I didn't think about it again for a long time, though I would think about it constantly, later, once I understood what that fresh coat of paint might have been meant to hide. We moved in on a Wednesday in September of 1999. My parents let me and my little brother Milo stay home from school until the following Monday, which felt like a gift at the time. 4 extra days of freedom before facing a brand new 5th grade classroom full of strangers. My mom set up a folding card table in the living room with my new coloring books and a fresh box of crayons, the big 64 count with the built-in sharpener molded into the back of the box. And Milo got a wooden dollhouse that used to belong to our grandmother, the one my mom had kept in a storage unit since she passed away the winter before. That dollhouse was one of the only things of Grandma's that had survived the move from her house into ours after she died, and my mom's hands shook a little when she unwrapped it from the layers of newspaper it had been packed in for almost a year. I didn't understand grief all the way yet, not at 10, but I understood that the dollhouse mattered more than any other object we owned, and that made it matter to me too, in a vague, protective way I couldn't have put into words. On my second day off from school, I sat down at the card table to color and noticed something wrong with my crayons. I counted them twice, because I was that kind of careful kid, lining them up in neat rows across the table, and there were only 63. The blue one was missing, the sky-colored one I always reached for first, because I liked drawing houses with big blue skies stretched over them. I checked under the table, behind the couch cushions inside the box itself, turning it upside down and shaking it, and it simply wasn't there. I told my mom, and she said crayon factories probably messed up counts sometimes, and told me not to worry about it. And I mostly believed her, because at the time, there wasn't any other explanation worth considering. 4 days after that, I went down to the basement alone to dig a jump rope out of one of the unlabeled boxes my dad had stacked against the far wall. The basement still smelled like fresh paint, that flat, slightly sour smell that gets into the back of your throat and stays there, and the single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling buzzed the way old bulbs do right before they finally die. I found the box with the jump rope without much trouble, but on my way back toward the stairs, something small and blue caught my eye sitting on top of the water heater, right on the section my dad and I had watched that man painting during our tour. It was my crayon. The paper wrapper had been peeled halfway down and worn to a stub, like it had been pressed hard against the surface for a long time. And underneath it, scratched crookedly into the still soft paint on the tank, someone had written, "Is anybody there?" in shaky, uneven letters, the kind a young child makes when they're pressing too hard with something that isn't really meant for writing on metal. I stood there for what felt like a full minute, just looking at it. I didn't touch the crayon. I went back upstairs and didn't tell my parents anything that day, because even at 10, I understood that some things sound crazy said out loud, and I didn't want to be the new kid who said crazy things in her first week at a new school. I started school that Monday, and it took less than a full day for kids to start asking questions about where I lived. A girl named Patty Eaves sat next to me at lunch and asked what street my house was on, and when I told her, her eyes went wide and she said, "Wait, you live in the Whitfield house?" Her friend across the table leaned in immediately and said, "Oh my God, that's Dean's house." And both of them looked at me like I just announced I lived in a cemetery. It took some prying, and eventually a question to a teacher's aide who'd grown up in the same town before I fully understood what they meant. A boy named Dean Whitfield had lived in our house with his parents back in the early 80s, and he'd been hit by a car right out front, in the street, directly in front of our own front porch, when he was 8 years old, chasing a ball that had rolled off the lawn into the road. He died before the ambulance even arrived. The Whitfield family moved away not long after that, and the house had changed owners 3 or 4 times since, though nobody at school seemed entirely sure of the details beyond that. What they were sure of was that older kids used to dare each other to ring our doorbell on Halloween and sprint away before anyone answered, because everybody in that part of town said the house was haunted, though nobody could ever quite explain by what exactly, beyond a boy's name and a bad feeling that it apparently outlived 3 separate families. I didn't tell my parents what I'd learned for almost 2 weeks, partly because I didn't want them thinking I was already scared of our own house, and partly because I genuinely wasn't sure I believed any of it myself. But small things kept happening that made it harder and harder to pretend I hadn't heard a word of it. My mom mentioned one morning, half laughing, that she'd left a grocery list and a pen out on the kitchen counter the night before, and had found the pen capped neatly and set on top of a completely blank sheet of paper the next morning, the actual list gone entirely, as if it had never been written at all. My dad blamed it on the movers still shuffling through stray paperwork weeks after the fact, which didn't really hold together as an explanation, but it was the kind of thing that let everyone go back to their coffee without dwelling on it. It happened again about a week later, this time with a shopping list my mom had left folded next to the toaster, and again the following weekend with a set of directions my dad had scribbled on a receipt before running errands, both replaced by nothing but a blank sheet folded into careful, even corners lined up so precisely that my mother said later it looked more like something done by a machine than by a person in a hurry. She started keeping a small notebook after that, timing when things went missing and when they turned up rearranged, though she never told me what she hoped to prove by tracking it. Only that writing it down made her feel less like she was losing her mind on her own. The thermostat in that house was the old dial kind, round and mounted in the hallway between the living room and the staircase, the type you had to physically turn with your fingers to change. More than once that October, my dad came downstairs in the morning to find it cranked all the way down to 60, the whole house freezing, our breath fogging faintly in the kitchen. And he'd grumble about Milo playing with it, even though Milo swore up and down every time that he hadn't touched it, and even though the dial was mounted higher on the wall than Milo could reach without dragging a chair over, which nobody ever found moved from where it belonged in the dining room. My dad eventually started marking the dial with a strip of masking tape set at 68 degrees, just to see for himself whether it would move overnight without anyone touching it. Twice that same month, he found the tape torn cleanly off and the dial turned back down again. The strip of tape itself never turning up anywhere in the room, not on the floor, not stuck to the wall nearby, simply gone. There was also the sound, which none of us mentioned to each other for a long time, because it seemed like the sort of thing you were supposed to ignore in an old house. It came from inside the walls near the top of the basement stairs, a slow, uneven series of knocks that didn't match the rhythm of the pipes settling or the furnace kicking on. More like the sound of something dragging itself along behind the drywall, pausing, dragging again. My dad checked the pipes twice with a flashlight and found nothing wrong with them. No loose fittings, no obvious source for the noise at all. It only ever happened at night, and it only ever happened on nights when the temperature outside had dropped hard, as if the cold itself woke something up. I started associating that sound with a particular smell that would follow a few minutes later, faint and sour, like a wet coat left too long in a closed car, and once that smell reached the top of the stairs, the knocking always stopped completely, like whatever had been making it had finally arrived where it wanted to be. The swing set had come with the house, an old metal A-frame with 2 chain swings that my dad kept saying he'd take down eventually, since the paint was chipping badly and one of the top chain links had rusted almost all the way through. We never got around to it that first year. I remember standing at my bedroom window in early November, on one of those still cold afternoons where you can see your own breath, but there's no wind at all. Not even enough to stir the bare branches of the maple tree in the yard, and watching the left hand swing rock slowly back and forth on its own, the chain creaking in a slow, even rhythm, almost exactly like someone sitting in it and pushing off gently again and again with the toes of their shoes. The right-hand swing never moved. Not once, not that whole year, no matter how hard the wind blew on other windier days. I asked my mom about it once, and she looked out the window for a long moment, didn't answer right away, and then told me to come help her fold the laundry piled on her bed. We had a cat named Whiskey, an orange tabby who'd belonged to our family since before I was even born, and every night my parents locked him out of my bedroom because he liked to sleep directly on my chest. And my mom worried, in that particular way new old parents worry about strange things, that he might somehow smother me in my sleep. This was such an established routine that I barely noticed it happening most nights. Every morning, my mom or dad would crack my door open just wide enough to let Whiskey slip out into the hallway, then shut it again quietly behind him while I kept sleeping. One night in late November, I woke to Whiskey scratching frantically at my door and yowling in a way I genuinely never heard him make before. A high, panicked sound that didn't sound like a cat asking to be let in or out so much as a cat asking for help. Before I could even fully sit up, the door swung open on its own, and instead of trotting out the way he always did, Whiskey shot backward away from the opening, fur standing straight up along the entire length of his spine, hissing at the empty doorway like there was something standing directly in it that only he could see. Then, just as suddenly, he bolted past whatever it was and tore off down the hall. In the morning, I asked my mom why she'd opened my door in the middle of the night instead of waiting for morning like usual. She said she hadn't gotten up at all, and neither had my dad, and the two of them looked at each other in a way that told me they weren't just saying that to make me feel better about it. It was around this same stretch of November that things stopped feeling like a house with a strange history and started feeling like a house that was paying very close, very specific attention to us, and to me most of all. I began finding things disturbed in ways that felt personal rather than random. My grandmother's old sewing kit, one of the few possessions besides the dollhouse that had come to live with us after she died, turned up open on my bedroom floor one afternoon, the spools of colored thread unwound and looped into strange loose knots around each other, even though it had been packed away in the hall closet, a room I hadn't gone anywhere near that entire day. I found a shoebox of old photographs, pictures of me and my grandmother from a trip to the coast this summer before she got sick, pulled out from under my bed and fanned across the carpet, several of them creased sharply down the middle like someone had folded them in half, and then tried, not quite successfully, to smooth them flat again. My mom asked if I'd been looking at them and crying, assuming I was working through the loss in my own 10-year-old way, and I told her the truth, that I hadn't touched them at all, and she didn't press it any further. Though I noticed she started checking on me more often at night after that conversation. What bothered me most wasn't simply that the photographs had been moved. It was that whoever had gone through that shoebox had chosen the pictures with my grandmother's face clearly visible, out of dozens of others, birthdays and vacations and school photos that were never touched at all, only the handful where she was unmistakably there, as if something had gone looking through the box specifically for her. The Christmas music started the first week of December. We owned an old wood-paneled stereo in the living room, secondhand when my parents bought it years earlier, and one evening we all heard it click on by itself from the kitchen, playing a scratchy recording of what sounded like a children's choir singing a carol I didn't recognize, full of hiss and pop like something recorded decades before I was born. My dad went in and switched it off, checked the plug, checked the volume dial, found absolutely nothing wrong with the machine itself, and it happened 3 more separate times that month. Always in the evening. Always the same warped, tinny recording, the same 3 or 4 seconds of a boy's thin voice looping over and over before the actual song properly began. And every single time we found the volume knob turned to that exact same position, no matter where any of us had left it set before. By the middle of December, Milo had started talking about a boy who lived in the basement. He was 6 years old, and at first my parents assumed it was simply an imaginary friend, the kind of thing kids his age often invent, and they mostly humored him, asking what the boy's name was, what he looked like when Milo talked about him. Milo said his name was Dean, which none of us had told him, not once, and he said Dean didn't like to come all the way up the stairs anymore because his legs didn't work right. When my mom asked what that was supposed to mean, Milo just shrugged and went back to lining up his little metal cars along the edge of the coffee table, and he refused to say anything more about it, no matter how gently she pushed. After that, Milo stopped wanting to go into the basement at all, even to retrieve toys he'd left down there, and he started sleeping with his bedroom door propped open and a nightlight plugged in, something he genuinely hadn't needed in well over a year. A few days before I saw him myself, Milo came into the kitchen one evening with a fresh scrape across the back of his hand, 3 thin red lines close together, and when my mom asked what happened, he said Dean had been trying to hold his hand to walk him down to see something, and he'd pulled away too fast and caught his knuckles on the door frame doing it. My mom crouched down and asked him gently, in the careful voice parents use when they're trying not to frighten a child further, whether Dean had ever actually touched him before. And Milo nodded like it was an ordinary question and said Dean's hand always felt like it had been left outside too long. She cleaned the scrape with peroxide and put a cartoon bandage over it, and didn't say much else in front of him, but I saw her go stand at the basement door by herself later that night with her arms crossed, just looking at it, for a long time, before she finally turned off the hall light and went to bed. I was the one who finally saw him first on a Tuesday night in mid-December, when I got up to use the bathroom sometime around 2 in the morning. The hallway light was off, as it always was overnight, but there was enough moonlight coming through the window at the far end of the hall that I could make out shapes, clearly enough to walk without turning anything on. I saw him standing at the top of the basement stairs, at the far end of that same hallway, behind a door we normally kept shut. The door stood open. He was small, smaller than me, and for one brief, hopeful second I thought it might actually be Milo, sleepwalking, until I got close enough to see his hands. They were resting flat against the door frame on either side of him, and the fingers were too long, stretched out well past where a child's fingers should reasonably end. And the skin covering them wasn't skin the way I understood skin to look. It had a dull, waxy sheen to it, the exact grayish-blue color of a bruise that hadn't finished healing, a color I recognized immediately, because it was the precise shade of the crayon that had gone missing from my box back in September. The skin wasn't smooth anywhere. It was cracked all over in thin, dry lines, the way mud cracks at the bottom of a pond after a long, dry summer. And in some of those cracks, the color underneath ran darker, almost black, like something had once bled beneath the surface and dried there permanently. I couldn't see his face clearly in the dark, only that where his eyes should have been there were two shallow creases instead, like folds pressed into fabric, catching none of the pale moonlight that lit up everything else in that hallway. I didn't scream. I don't fully understand why. I just stood completely still, and after a few seconds that stretched out far longer than they actually were, he tilted his head slowly to one side, a motion that produced a soft, dry, cracking sound, almost like knuckles popping one after another, and then he stepped backward through the doorway and down into the dark of the stairwell, and the basement door swung shut behind him on its own, without a hand anywhere near it. I told my parents everything the next morning, all of it laid out at once, the crayon in September, what the kids at school had said about Dean and the car, the sewing kit and the photographs, and finally, in a shaking voice, what I'd actually seen standing in the hallway. My dad wanted very badly to believe I'd simply been half asleep and had frightened myself with an ordinary shadow. And for a few days, he tried hard to hold on to that version of things, checking the basement door hinges, oiling them thoroughly so they couldn't swing on their own, installing a small chain lock high up on the frame where Milo definitely couldn't reach it, even standing on a chair. The chain lock held for exactly 1 week. On the 7th night, we all woke at once to it rattling violently against the doorframe, a sound like someone shaking it as hard as they possibly could from the other side, over and over, fast enough that the entire door shuddered visibly in its frame with each impact. My dad ran into the hallway and found the chain torn completely off, not simply unlocked, torn. The small metal bracket ripped clean out of the wood, leaving a raw, splintered hole behind where the screws had been anchored. He stood there, staring at it under his flashlight for a long time before finally coming back to bed, and he never once brought up fixing it again after that night. I want to be clear that by this point, none of us were sleeping well, and it wasn't only fear of something unseen anymore. It was the growing certainty that whatever lived in that house had begun paying attention to what specifically hurt each of us, individually, and had started using that knowledge with something close to intention. My mom found her own mother's rosary, which she kept in her nightstand drawer and hadn't worn since the funeral, laid out carefully across the roof of Grandma's dollhouse one afternoon, arranged in a small, deliberate loop, like a tiny fence ringing the little wooden chimney. She hadn't taken it out of that drawer in months. Around this same time, I started noticing that when I lay in bed at night, right before sleep finally pulled me under, I would sometimes hear, very faintly, something that sounded almost exactly like my grandmother's voice. Not actual words, just a tone, a low hum. The specific tuneless way she used to hum along to whatever was playing on the radio without ever quite knowing the melody, drifting from somewhere down the hall. Every time I found the courage to get up and check, the hallway sat completely empty and silent. And by morning, I always managed to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing, because the alternative felt like more than I had room in my head to hold at 10 years old. The worst night of that entire winter came the week before Christmas. I want to be honest about what was going on inside me during that particular stretch, because it matters directly to what happened next. I had been carrying a kind of sadness since my grandmother's death that I didn't yet have real words for, a heaviness that had only gotten worse since we'd moved into that house, since every new room somehow reminded me of her without her actually being anywhere in it. I had started having thoughts that frightened me, dark thoughts about not wanting to be around anymore, thoughts I hadn't told a single person about, partly because I didn't fully understand them myself yet, and partly because some small, ashamed part of me believed I'd get in trouble simply for having them at all. That particular night, I was sitting on the floor of my closet with the door pulled almost shut behind me, which had become a habit of mine whenever the sadness got too big and heavy to sit with out in the open, and I was crying in that silent, exhausting way where your whole chest aches from the effort of trying not to make any noise at all. I heard the closet door creak, though I hadn't touched it, and it swung open another few inches on its own. I looked up, half expecting to see Milo or my mom checking on me, and instead I saw those same long gray-blue fingers curl slowly around the edge of the door from outside, at a height that put them roughly level with my own eyes, even though I was sitting down on the floor, which meant that whatever they belonged to was crouched low just outside the closet, folded down small enough to meet me at my exact level. I froze completely. The fingers tightened against the wood, and the door began pulling open wider, slow and deliberate rather than yanked, the way you'd ease open something you didn't want to startle too quickly. I remember trying to scream and only managing a thin, useless sound, remember scrambling backward into the corner of the closet, knocking over a box of old winter shoes, my hand closing around nothing remotely useful to defend myself with. The door swung open all the way, and he was crouched right there in the frame, close enough that I could smell something underneath the ordinary basement smell of dust and old wood that had somehow followed him upstairs. Something sharper, almost like hot asphalt after a sudden summer rain. The exact smell you get standing too close to a road on a warm afternoon. His face was inches from mine, and up close I could finally see that where his mouth should have been there was no opening at all. Only a smooth, seamless stretch of that same cracked gray-blue skin, as if his entire lower face had been sanded down flat and left that way. And yet I could hear breathing, ragged and wet, coming from somewhere close by, though I couldn't tell exactly where it originated. One of those long hands reached toward me, and I felt fingers close hard around my wrist, cold in a way that didn't feel like ordinary temperature so much as a total absence of any warmth at all, like pressing your hand against the inside wall of a freezer with wet skin, and I felt the grip tighten enough that I finally cried out for real. Loud enough that I heard my parents' bedroom door bang open almost instantly down the hall. By the time my dad got the closet light switched on, whatever had been gripping my wrist was already gone, the closet door swinging gently back and forth on its hinge as if nothing had happened at all. But the marks were still there. 4 deep, red-purple lines pressed into my skin, and a pattern that matched fingers far longer and thinner than any hand belonging to anyone in our family, already beginning to bruise a deeper color by the time my mom got a proper look at my arm under the bathroom light, and there were 2 thin, shallow scratches on the inside of my forearm as well. Clean, rather than ragged. The kind you'd get from something with hard, narrow nails, rather than the messy edges of an ordinary accidental scrape. My mom took photographs of my arm the next morning with the disposable camera we kept in the kitchen junk drawer, because by that point she'd stopped bothering to explain things away entirely and had started documenting them instead. Though to this day, I don't know if she ever showed those pictures to another living soul outside our own family. The sleeve of the nightgown I'd been wearing was torn clean through at the cuff, A long, clean tear rather than anything frayed the way fabric usually looks when it snags on something by accident. More like it had been sliced. My dad kept that nightgown folded inside a plastic bag out in the garage for years afterward, long after my mother had thrown away nearly everything else from that period of our lives. And I never once asked him why. Because I think we both silently understood it was the closest thing either of us had to proof, for the nights when the whole winter started to feel like something we might have, exaggerated in our own frightened memories. We didn't call anyone official after that night. Not a priest, not any kind of specialist, nothing beyond a regular doctor for the bruise itself. Mostly because my parents simply didn't know what you were supposed to do in a situation like ours, and because some part of all three of us, I think, was quietly afraid that saying any of it out loud to the wrong person would somehow make it more permanently real than it already felt. What we did instead was start sleeping with our bedroom doors open, every single one, hallway lights burning all night long, and my parents began taking turns staying awake in shifts, which is not something that holds up for very long when you both still have full-time jobs waiting for you every morning. 4 days after that, on the 23rd of December, 2 police officers knocked on our front door in the middle of a gray, overcast afternoon. My mom answered, confused, since none of us had called anyone, and the older of the 2 officers said they'd been doing a routine patrol through the neighborhood, and something about our particular house had made him want to stop and check in, just to be sure everything was all right inside. He said it a little sheepishly, the way you say something when you already know how strange it's going to sound out loud, and my mom, caught off guard, told him everything was fine. We were simply still getting settled after the move. The officer nodded slowly, but he kept glancing past her shoulder toward the upstairs windows the entire time they spoke. And right before he turned to leave, he asked, almost as an afterthought, whether we had another child in the house besides the 2 he could see standing behind her in the front hall. My mom said no, just the 2 of us kids. And the officer went quiet for a moment, and then admitted that from the street, he could have sworn he'd seen a small boy standing at the upstairs hallway window a few minutes earlier, just standing there watching the road, and that something about the sight of him had bothered the officer enough to actually pull the patrol car over and come check on us in person. My bedroom window faced directly onto the front yard. It was the only window on that side of the house. I had been lying alone on my bed that entire gray afternoon, and I hadn't gone anywhere near the window at all. The officers left without any further explanation, the kind of visit that gets quietly written off eventually as a slow shift and an overactive imagination. Except that none of us in that house needed any convincing anymore that something had genuinely been standing at that window, or any real guessing as to why it might have chosen that particular gray afternoon to do it. 4 days after it had gripped my wrist hard enough to leave a bruise. 3 days before what would otherwise have been the darkest Christmas of my life, for reasons that had nothing at all to do with anything supernatural. My parents never told me directly what they suspected that visit meant, but I remember my mother sitting on the edge of my bed that same night longer than usual, not saying much, just staying close, and I remember for the first time in weeks actually managing to fall asleep without crying first. We moved out of that house the following August, less than a year after we'd first arrived, officially because my dad's job had transferred him 2 states over, though I've always privately suspected that reason had more to do with giving all of us an explanation that sounded ordinary than with the actual truth of why we needed to leave when we did. In the months leading up to that final move, things never escalated again quite the way they had that December. But they never fully stopped either. The thermostat still dropped on its own every few weeks. Notes still occasionally appeared on paper left out overnight, always short always some version of the same handful of words. Stay and cold and once near the end of that summer. A single line that read "Don't go," pressed so hard into the paper that it tore through in two places. My mother stopped leaving pens and paper out anywhere in that house entirely after that particular note, and I noticed she started sleeping with my grandmother's old rosary on her own nightstand instead of packed away in a drawer, though she never said a word to me about why. The day the moving truck finally pulled away for the last time, I asked my dad if I could go down to the basement one more time before we locked up and handed over the keys, and he let me, standing at the top of the stairs while I went down alone to look at the empty space where all our boxes had been stacked for months. The water heater was still there, since it belonged to the house itself and not to us, its casing still coated in that same fresh gray paint from the day my dad and I had first toured the place 11 months earlier. Except it wasn't smooth anymore. Running down one whole side of the tank, low near the concrete floor, someone had scratched 4 parallel lines through the paint and into the raw metal beneath it, deep enough to catch the basement light along their bright, unfinished edges, spaced exactly the width of a child's hand held flat, and at the bottom of those 4 lines, pressed into the drying edge of a small puddle of water that had leaked out from somewhere near the base of the tank, was the clear print of a bare foot, far too small to belong to my father, far too small to belong to anyone who had actually lived in that house at all that year, and still faintly damp, as if whoever had left it there had only just stepped away. I was not raised to believe in ghosts, and even now I would hesitate before using that word for what happened in our first house. That is not because nothing strange occurred. Enough happened that my husband and I eventually sold a home we had expected to raise our children in. Enough happened that my father, who thought paranormal stories were ridiculous, refused to spend another night there. Enough happened that we had physical damage photographed by police, a contractor, and an insurance adjuster. I still prefer saying that something was in that house. I cannot tell you what. We bought the property in June of 2017, when our daughter, May, was 2 and I was 6 months pregnant with our son. It was in St. Paul, Minnesota, on a street filled with mature trees and houses built between the First and Second World Wars. Ours dated to 1924, according to county records. The place was larger than it looked from outside. A small covered porch led into a central foyer. The living room occupied most of the left side of the first floor, with 3 windows facing the street and one looking toward the neighboring property. On the right was the dining room. Behind that sat the kitchen, which had been renovated in the 1990s. Previous owners had enclosed part of the rear porch and added a large sliding glass door opening onto a wooden deck. That was the big door, as May called it. Between the kitchen and living room was a short hallway containing the basement entrance, a half bath, and an old floor-to-ceiling cabinet that we used for cleaning supplies. The main staircase began in the foyer. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. Our room was at the back of the house. May had the front bedroom over the living room. The smaller room between ours and hers became the nursery when Noah was born. The basement was unfinished except for a laundry area and a workshop bench. There was also an odd, shallow room under the front porch that could only be reached through a short opening in the foundation wall. I used it for paint cans and things I did not want May touching. We knew there had been a fire in the house in 2009. The realtor disclosed it before we made an offer. Apparently, an electrical problem had started behind the kitchen wall. The damage was contained mostly to the first floor, and nobody had been hurt. The property had been professionally repaired. I hired an inspector anyway. He found nothing alarming. New wiring, new insulation, updated smoke detectors. The fire became just another fact about an old building, For the first 4 months, life there was completely ordinary. May loved the staircase. She loved the backyard. She especially loved her bedroom because one wall had a deep window seat built between two closets. The room was painted a pale green when we moved in. My husband, Luke, repainted it soft yellow because that was the color she wanted. I remember those details because the first incident happened in that bedroom. It was October. Noah had been born in August, so we were exhausted most of the time. May was still adjusting to having a baby in the house. Bedtime had become more difficult. She wanted one more story, another drink, a different stuffed animal, and then a second version of whatever she had already requested. One night, I finally got her under the blanket, a little after 8. The lamp was off. Moonlight came through the blinds. I was sitting beside her, rubbing her back when she looked toward the bedroom entrance. She smiled. Then she asked, "Who's that guy?" I turned. The bedroom entrance was closed. Nobody else was upstairs. Luke had the baby downstairs. I looked around for a toy. There were stuffed animals near the wall, a plastic tea set, and several books beside the window seat. Nothing resembling a person. "What guy, honey?" May pointed. "There, where?" "By the door." There was nothing there. "What is he doing?" May answered immediately. Hiding, she was not frightened. That is the part people always misunderstand when I tell this story. She did not whisper. She did not cling to me. She looked amused, as if somebody was playing peekaboo badly. I asked whether the man was scared. She shook her head. "No, he's hiding." "From who?" May shrugged. Then she asked for water. That was it. I went downstairs and told Luke. He laughed. "So we have a guy now?" "Apparently. What does he look like?" I didn't ask. You failed as an investigator. We turned it into a family joke. Whenever something went missing, Luke blamed that guy. If the kitchen light was left on, I would say the man upstairs must have needed it. There was no belief behind any of this. It was a toddler saying something strange. Toddlers do that. The second incident happened during winter. Noah was around 6 months old. I had both children in May's bed because our furnace was being serviced and the nursery was unusually cold. We were talking quietly before nap time. May was arranging a blanket around her little brother. She said, "Okay, just us." Then she counted with one finger. Me and Mommy, and him and her. I assumed him meant Noah. I asked who her was. May pointed toward the window seat. "Nobody," I said. "Who's over there?" She stared at the empty corner for several seconds. Then said, "She doesn't want you to look." That bothered me. Not enough to panic. Enough that I glanced toward the window seat several times before leaving the room. I told Luke that evening. He still found the whole thing funny. He named the invisible visitor that guy, capital letters and all, and the name stuck. For several months, anything odd in the house fell under that category. A cabinet open? That guy. A missing sock? That guy. Noise in the basement? That guy. It made the unexplained feel harmless. Then May named him herself. She had always had a strange habit of touching people's necks when she was tired. This started before we bought the house. If she sat in my lap, she would sometimes rest a hand at the base of my throat. She did it to Luke, too. She once embarrassed my sister by reaching across a restaurant booth and touching her neck while asking whether she was sleepy. We had no idea why. Children develop peculiar habits. One afternoon, I was trying to get May to nap. She was overtired and restless. She kept rolling around, touching my face, then my shoulder. Finally, she put both hands around the sides of my neck, not hard enough to hurt, just firmer than usual. Her expression changed. She lowered her voice. "Mr. Longneck." I moved her hands. "What did you call me?" She giggled. Mr. Longneck, who's Mr. Longneck? Her smile disappeared. She looked past me toward the closed bedroom entrance. Then she rolled onto her side. I asked again. She tucked her knees up. He's a grown-up. What grown-up? No answer. Is he the guy who hides? May pulled the blanket over her shoulder. I asked what he looked like. She said, he wears tall clothes. I did not know what that meant. A coat? She nodded. And a hat. What kind of hat? A daddy hat. Luke wore baseball caps constantly, so that description could mean anything. I asked whether Mr. Longneck was nice. May said sometimes. That was the first answer that genuinely unsettled me. What does that mean? He plays. With you? She nodded. Is he scary? Sometimes. What makes him scary? She touched her own throat, then immediately changed the subject by asking for her stuffed rabbit. I did not push. I was very conscious of how easily adults can lead children. If I asked, does he have blood on his face? A toddler might say yes, simply because I introduced the idea. So I stopped. Luke agreed that we should not interrogate her. We would listen if she volunteered something. That spring, we found the box inside the wall. Luke was replacing an old return air grill near the bottom of the main staircase. The vent was no longer connected to our HVAC system. During the 2009 renovation, the ductwork had been rerouted, but several decorative grills remained. He unscrewed the metal cover because one corner rattled whenever someone walked down the stairs. Behind it was a shallow cavity. Luke reached inside, expecting to find loose plaster. Instead, he pulled out a rectangular metal tin. It was roughly the size of a shoebox, badly rusted along one edge. Someone had wrapped it in oilcloth before pushing it into the wall. The cloth crumbled when he touched it. We opened the tin at the dining room table. Most of the contents were mundane. 2 department store catalogs from the 1940s. A small packet containing pearl collar studs. Several receipts. 3 postcards with no writing. A black and white photograph of the house taken from the street. A notebook about the size of my hand. The notebook contained lists of names. Nothing else. Some were first names only. Arthur, Elsie, Warren, June, Thomas, Clara. Several names had numbers beside them. A few had dates, no explanation. Luke wondered if the house had once been rented by room. That was possible. Large houses from that period were often divided during the Depression or wartime. We also found newer things. Photographs from the 2009 fire. Newspaper clippings about the renovation. A handwritten note from the owners at that time explaining that workers had discovered the older objects behind a damaged kitchen wall and decided to preserve them when repairs were completed. That seemed charming rather than sinister. A little accidental time capsule. We spent an afternoon looking through everything. May wandered in and out of the dining room. At one point, she saw the packet of pearl studs. She stopped. Those are his. Luke looked at me. Whose? May pointed toward the stairs. Mr. Longneck's. Neither of us laughed. I asked how she knew. She shrugged. He has lots. Lots of what? She touched the packet. White circles. Luke gently moved her hand away because the paper was fragile. May immediately lost interest and went back to her toys. That evening, we put everything into a plastic storage container and carried it to the top shelf of our bedroom closet. I did not believe the objects were haunted. I still don't know whether they had anything to do with what followed. The timing was difficult to ignore. The house became noisier afterward. Not dramatically. We started hearing movement in the kitchen during the afternoon when May was supposed to be sleeping. At first I thought mice had gotten into the walls. An exterminator found no signs of rodents. The noises continued. A chair sliding slightly. Something hard rolling over the floor. the sliding glass entrance giving a brief shudder even when there was no wind. May began talking about Mr. Longneck more often. Never at breakfast, never while playing outside, almost always around nap time. One afternoon, I decided to ask a few neutral questions. Does Mr. Longneck come here? Yes, how? May pointed downstairs. The big door. The patio door? She nodded. What does he do after that? She climbed out of bed and walked toward the hallway. He comes this way. I followed. She went downstairs, then through the kitchen. She crossed past the dining room and entered the living room. She stopped beside the front window. Then, here. What happens here? He looks. Outside? No, at what? May became distracted by a toy on the floor. That was the end of it. A few days later, she provided another detail. Mr. Longneck said trick or treat. This happened in May. Halloween had been 7 months earlier. I asked whether he wore a costume. No. What does he wear? Monster clothes. That phrase became important later. I assumed she meant old-fashioned clothing looked like a Halloween costume. Where does he live? Far? Does he go home? Sometimes. How? May looked upward. With Santa. I almost laughed. Santa takes him? In the sky. That sounded exactly like toddler logic. Old man in hat. Halloween, Santa, everything weird gets mixed together. I felt relieved. Then, she added, he can't go when the little girl cries. I asked what little girl. The yellow one. Yellow clothes? May touched her own hair. Hair like me. May's hair was light blonde then. I asked if the child had a name. No, does she come here too? Sometimes. Is she nice? May nodded. Does she scare you? No. Does Mr. Longneck? She went quiet. I changed the subject. Our next major change had nothing to do with the house. My father moved in. His name was Frank. He was 68 and recovering from a serious cardiac procedure. He lived alone after my mother died when I was 19, and his doctor wanted somebody nearby while he regained strength. Our relationship was complicated. My mother had died suddenly from a cerebral aneurysm. One afternoon, she complained about a headache. The next morning, she was gone. Dad changed afterward. He did not become abusive or cruel. He became absent while still living in the same house. He worked. He came home. He paid bills. He made sure I had food. Emotionally, he disappeared. I spent the last 2 years of high school feeling as though I had lost both parents, even though one still sat across from me at dinner. I resented him for that. As an adult, I understood more. He had lost his wife. He did not know how to grieve while raising a teenage daughter. Understanding did not erase everything. When his health declined, I was the only child close enough to help. So he moved into our guest room on the first floor, which had originally been my office. May adored him. Frank adored her. He was different with grandchildren than he had been with me after Mom died. Patient, playful, present. I was grateful. I was also jealous in a way I hated admitting. One morning, while driving the children to my sister's house, May pointed toward the empty passenger seat. Is Grandpa coming? Grandpa's at home. She kept staring at the seat. He's right there. I glanced over. Nothing. Grandpa isn't in the car, honey. May looked confused. Then frowned. That's not Grandpa. My hands tightened around the wheel. Who is it? She stared another few seconds. Mr. Longneck. I pulled into a grocery store parking lot. My heart was beating much faster than the situation justified. I turned around. Where is he now? May looked at me. Gone? Did he look like Grandpa? She nodded. Then shook her head. Only his sweater. Dad wore a brown zip-up cardigan constantly. I asked whether Mr. Longneck wore the same sweater. No, he was holding it. I did not know what to do with that answer. When I got home, Frank's brown cardigan was missing. He thought he had left it upstairs. We searched. It was not in his room, not in the laundry, not in the car. That evening, I found it hanging over the back of a kitchen chair. Dad had not been in the kitchen since lunch. Luke had been at work. I had been out. The house had been empty except for Frank, who had spent the afternoon sleeping downstairs. Could he have carried it into the kitchen and forgotten? Absolutely, he was taking pain medication. He was tired. I accepted that explanation. Then I noticed something on the collar. A small pearl stud. It was pushed through the knit fabric near the neckline, not pinned, forced through. I removed it. The stud matched the packet from the wall. Same creamy color, same shape. I went upstairs. The plastic storage bin remained on the closet shelf. The lid was closed. Inside, the paper packet had torn along one seam. One stud was missing, I told Luke. He stared at it for a long time. Then he said the children might have gotten into the box. Noah can't climb. May can. The closet shelf is 6 feet high. Then your dad. Why would Dad put a collar stud in his sweater? He didn't answer. That was when Luke stopped making jokes about that guy. We moved the old objects into the basement. I know people will say that was stupid. If we genuinely suspected the items, why not throw them away? Because we did not genuinely believe it. Not yet. We had suspicion. Suspicion is not the same thing. The objects were part of the house's history. Throwing away 92-year-old documents because a toddler had an imaginary friend felt ridiculous. So we sealed the plastic bin and put it on a shelf in the workshop. For almost a month, activity decreased. May mentioned Mr. Longneck only once. Then the cow toy moved. It was an old Fisher-Price farm toy that had belonged to my cousin. You pulled a cord, and a plastic cow rotated behind a small window while the toy made farm sounds. May almost never played with it. It lived inside a toy chest in the upstairs nursery because Noah was more interested in it than she was. One Tuesday afternoon, I put both kids down. Frank was at physical therapy. Luke was working. I went downstairs to answer emails. The house became quiet. About 20 minutes later, I heard the farm toy, a plastic moo, then a mechanical clicking noise. I assumed May had gotten out of bed. I walked into the kitchen. The toy sat in the middle of the floor, its pull cord stretched toward the sliding glass entrance. I stopped. The toy chest was upstairs. The child-proof gate at the top of the stairs remained closed. I walked closer. The cow inside the toy rotated once. Nobody touched the cord. Then it stopped. I called upstairs. May? No answer. I checked both children. Asleep, when I returned, the cord had moved. It now ran from the toy toward the living room. Not much, maybe a different angle. Enough that I noticed. I took a photograph. Then I put the toy on the counter. When Luke came home, I told him what happened. He thought the spring mechanism might have retained tension. Reasonable, that did not explain how it got downstairs. We checked May's room. The gate, everything. She could theoretically have carried it downstairs before her nap, and I failed to notice. That became the explanation. Until the next afternoon. The cow toy appeared in the kitchen. Again. This time, it was on the other side of the room. The cord lay stretched toward the living room. May was at preschool. Noah was with me in the dining room. Frank was sleeping. I had been in the house all day. I had put the toy in the nursery closet myself. I took it upstairs. The closet door was open. The shelf where I had placed the toy was empty. I shut the closet. That night, I moved the toy into the basement. 2 days later, I found it on the living room windowsill. The pull cord had been wound around the handle. Tied through the loop was another pearl collar stud. I threw the toy away. Luke did not stop me. I also wanted to throw away the time capsule objects. He convinced me to wait until we had looked through them more carefully. His reasoning was that if the names corresponded to former owners, maybe knowing the history would make us feel less helpless. I agreed on one condition: no paranormal websites, no searching haunted house, no forcing facts into a ghost story. We used property records, census scans, and digitized newspapers. What we found was incomplete. A family named Vedder owned the property through much of the 1930s and 1940s. There were several names matching the notebook: Arthur Vedder, June Vedder, Clara Vedder. Warren was a boarder listed at the address in one census. Thomas appeared in an obituary, though we could not prove it was the same person. There was no Mr. Longneck, no mysterious death, no story about a man with an abnormal neck, no little blonde child who vanished. I was relieved. Then Luke noticed a newspaper advertisement from October 1941. The address was listed as a collection point for a neighborhood charity drive. Residents could bring used coats, shoes, and children's clothing. The person organizing the collection was Clara Vedder. That explained nothing. It also made May's phrase "monster clothes" less interesting, because old clothing could have been stored in the walls. The pearl collar studs might simply have belonged to Arthur. We stopped researching. I felt better for maybe 2 weeks. Then, my father saw him. Frank had reached the point where he could be alone for short periods. One afternoon, I took the children to a pediatric appointment. Luke was at work. Dad stayed home. We returned shortly before 4. Frank was sitting in the living room with every light on. The curtains were open. The television was off. He looked angry, not scared. What happened? Who was here? No one. Don't give me that. Dad, what are you talking about? He pointed toward the kitchen. Somebody came through the back. I checked the sliding entrance. Locked. Who? I couldn't see his face at first. My stomach tightened. Frank said he had been dozing in the recliner when he heard the patio latch. He assumed I had come home. Footsteps crossed the kitchen. He called my name. No answer. Then a man appeared near the dining room doorway. Frank described him as tall, but not unusually so. Dark coat. Narrow, brimmed hat. Old-fashioned white shirt. The strangest part was the collar. Dad said it looked as though the man were wearing several stiff white collars stacked on top of one another. Not one tall collar, separate bands, 5 or 6, each slightly misaligned. Each fastened near the side with a small, pale stud. There was no visible skin between them. The man's head seemed to rest on top of this column of white bands. Frank initially thought it was some kind of costume. He stood and told the stranger to leave. The man walked through the kitchen toward the living room. He did not respond. Frank picked up his cane. Then the stranger stopped beside the front window, exactly where May had told me Mr. Longneck always went. Frank said the man looked outside for several seconds, then turned. His face was ordinary, middle-aged, clean-shaven, nothing monstrous. But the stacked collars rotated separately when he turned his head. Dad said that was the moment he realized he was not looking at something normal. The lowest collar remained facing the window. The next one turned halfway. The third moved farther. By the time the man's face looked directly at Frank, each band pointed in a slightly different direction. Dad raised the cane. The man smiled, then simply stepped backward, not into another room, backward toward the living room wall. Frank blinked. The space was empty. I asked whether he'd been asleep. He became furious. I was awake enough to nearly hit him. Dad, you were napping. I know when I'm awake. Luke came home. Frank repeated the entire story. May was playing on the floor. When Dad described the collars, she looked up. Mr. Longneck the room became silent. Frank looked at me. What did she say? I told him. That night, Dad moved the chair he slept in away from the living room window. He stopped mocking the whole situation. I wish I could say we moved immediately. We didn't. The house was our largest financial asset. Luke and I had two small children. My father still needed care. We could not simply disappear into a hotel for months. Instead, we changed routines. No one napped upstairs alone. The sliding patio entrance stayed locked with a wooden bar in the track. We added cameras to the kitchen and living room. Frank kept his cane near him. We removed the plastic bin of old objects from the basement and put it in the detached garage at my sister's house. Nothing changed. That convinced me the time capsule was probably irrelevant. The kitchen noises continued. May still occasionally spoke to the yellow-haired child. She gave the child a name eventually. Nell. I do not know where she got it. When I asked if Nell was Mr. Longneck's daughter, May said no. Does she live here? She waits here. For what? May looked confused by the question. For him to stop. That answer kept me awake. I did not ask what she meant. The next incident gave us the first physical damage we could not dismiss. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. Luke was installing a baby gate near the basement steps. I was making lunch. Frank was outside on the deck with May. Noah was in a high chair. The sliding glass entrance was open because the weather was warm. Suddenly, May screamed. I dropped the knife I was holding. Luke ran past me. We reached the deck. Frank had May in his arms. She was crying. 4 long scratches ran down the outside of the glass patio panel. Not on the surface facing outdoors, on the interior side. The scratches began around adult shoulder height and continued downward nearly 3 feet. They were fresh enough that tiny grains of glass lay on the track. Luke checked immediately. It was not dirt. The surface had actually been scored. No person had been inside near the glass. I had been in the kitchen. Luke had been beside the basement steps. Noah was strapped into the high chair. Frank said the marks appeared while he watched. He had been sitting with May when she suddenly looked through the glass into the kitchen. She said, "He's here." Frank turned. Nobody. Then a scraping noise moved down the panel. 4 lines appeared. Frank grabbed May. He swore he saw a white collar past the dining room entrance. Luke searched the house. Nothing. Those scratches remained. A glass company later inspected them. The technician asked whether somebody had dragged a tool down the panel. We said we didn't know. He told us tempered glass was difficult to scratch that deeply accidentally. We replaced the door. The old panel went into the garage until the insurance claim was complete. For the first time, somebody outside our family saw evidence of what was happening. That did not make me feel better. It made me feel trapped. Frank suggested we sell. I reminded him he had laughed at us 2 months earlier. He accepted that. I was wrong. That sentence was difficult for my father. He rarely said it. Then he added something else. I've been wrong about a lot of things. I knew he wasn't talking about the house anymore. We sat in the kitchen after the children were asleep. Frank told me he knew he had failed me after Mom died. I immediately tried to stop him. Not because I didn't want the apology. Because I did. Too much. He kept going. He said grief had made him afraid of caring about anything, because caring meant having something else to lose. So I made you deal with it alone. I looked away. I wasn't alone. You were 17. 19, still a kid. I cried. Dad cried. That was the first time I saw him cry about my mother in almost 20 years. For weeks afterward, our relationship changed. Not magically. We still argued, but there was less old anger underneath everything. That matters because whatever was in the house started using him differently after that. May began seeing Grandpa when Grandpa was not present. Once she waved toward the basement stairs while Frank sat beside her at the dining table. Another time, she asked why there were two grandpas in the kitchen. Frank heard that one. He stood. "Where's the other one?" May pointed toward the pantry. "Nothing there." She said, "He doesn't have Grandpa's face today." Frank looked sick. The worst was when she started telling him not to wear the brown cardigan. He asked why. "Mr. Longneck likes it." Frank stopped wearing it. We donated the sweater. 3 days later, it appeared on his bed. I was the one who had dropped it at a charity shop. I had a receipt. The sweater was unmistakable because my mother had sewn a small green thread through one cuff years earlier after repairing it. That stitch was still there. So was a pearl stud near the collar. Frank packed a bag. He wanted to stay with my sister. His health was stronger by then. I understood. May cried when he told her. Frank promised he would visit constantly. The afternoon he left, May stood at the living room window. She watched him get into my sister's car, then said he doesn't want Grandpa to go. I asked who. She looked at me as if the answer was obvious. We should have followed Frank out. Instead, Luke and I stayed another 3 months while preparing the house for sale. Those months were the worst. Without my father there, Mr. Longneck became less subtle. The living room camera recorded a man-shaped distortion twice. Not a clear person. A vertical area where the image seemed compressed. Both times it appeared near the front window. The camera clock skipped several seconds afterward. The patio door alarm triggered during naps, even though the new panel remained locked. The cow toy came back. I had thrown it away months earlier. One afternoon, it sat in May's bedroom. Its pull cord was wrapped around the bedpost. She was at preschool. Luke saw it too. He picked it up with gloves and put it into a garbage bag. We drove it to the county disposal center. It did not return after that. Instead, other toys began moving. A wooden puzzle disappeared and reappeared under the kitchen table. One of Noah's stuffed animals turned up outside on the deck. May's toy doctor kit was found in the basement, despite the gate being locked. No single event was dramatic. The accumulation was. Meanwhile, May talked more about Nell. Nell did not like Mr. Longneck. Nell hid behind the curtains. Nell sometimes slept under May's bed. Nell had yellow hair. Nell did not want to go through the big door. I asked why. May became quiet. Then said, because last time hurt. That was the only reference to harm she ever made. We did not press. The confrontation happened in August, shortly before May turned 4. It was a weekday afternoon. Luke was at work. Frank had come over because I needed help watching the kids while I packed. He was no longer living with us, but he visited often. I had put Noah down in the nursery. May had refused to nap, so I let her color in her bedroom. Dad sat downstairs reading. I was in the basement sorting storage boxes. Around 2, I heard the sliding patio entrance open, not break. Open, the new lock made a distinct metal click. Then, the heavy panel moved along its track. I froze. Frank was in the living room. Maybe he had gone outside. Then I heard him shout, "Aaron." His voice was sharp. I ran upstairs. The kitchen was empty. The sliding glass panel stood halfway open. The wooden security bar lay on the floor. It had not been removed from the track. It was broken in 2, not snapped at a knot. Split near the center, Frank stood near the living room entrance holding his cane. "Get May." "Where is she?" "Upstairs. What happened?" He pointed toward the front room. I saw him. Then we heard May laughing upstairs. Dad said, "Go." I ran. Halfway up the staircase, the nursery door slammed. Noah started crying. May's bedroom door was open. I reached the landing. She was not in her room. "May?" No answer. I checked the bathroom. Empty, then I heard her voice through the floor vent near the landing. Mommy? The old decorative vent. The one connected to nothing. I crouched. May? A second voice answered. A little girl's voice. Not May. He's taking her. I stood so fast I hit the wall. From downstairs, Frank shouted again. Something heavy struck furniture. I ran down. The living room looked wrong. The curtains beside the front window had been pulled from one rod bracket. A lamp was on the floor. Dad stood near the dining room entrance. Mrs. Longneck stood between us. This was the first time I saw him. My daughter had described the clothes badly, but accurately. Dark wool coat, despite the summer heat. Narrow hat. White shirt. The collar was the thing my father described. 6 separate, stiff white bands rose from his shoulders to his jaw. Each one fastened on the left side with a pearl stud. They were not attached to one another. There should have been skin between them. There wasn't. Only dark gaps, thinner than a pencil line. His head sat above the top collar. Normal man's face. Maybe mid-40s. Brown eyes. Thin lips. One cheek slightly fuller than the other. He did not look dead. Then he turned toward me. The collars rotated independently. Bottom band first, second slower, third in the opposite direction. The movement produced a faint, dry clicking as the pearl studs touched. My body reacted before my mind could. I backed into the kitchen. Frank raised his cane. Where's my granddaughter? The man smiled. Then May appeared behind him. She was walking down the main staircase, not looking at us. Her eyes were open. Her expression was calm. A blonde child held her hand. Nell, I only saw her for a few seconds. She looked around 5. Yellow hair cut unevenly around the shoulders. Pale dress. Her most unusual feature was not her face. It was her shoes. The soles were covered in tiny metal furniture tacks, dozens of them, points facing downward. Each step should have made noise against the hardwood. They didn't. She walked silently. May came down beside her. Sweetheart, I said. May looked at me. Mr. Longneck says we're playing parade. No, the man's smile disappeared. Frank moved toward May. Mr. Longneck stepped sideways and blocked him. Dad swung the cane. It struck the man's shoulder. The sound was completely solid. Bone or muscle under cloth. The man staggered. I grabbed May. Nell released her hand immediately. Then, Mr. Longneck moved faster than any person wearing those clothes should have been able to. His hand caught the back of May's shirt. He pulled. I held her around the waist. The fabric stretched. She screamed. Frank struck him again. The cane hit one of the stacked collars. A pearl stud flew across the floor. The white band twisted. The man's head moved with it. For one horrible second, his face turned almost sideways while his shoulders stayed square. There was no broken bone sound, no blood. The collar simply rotated. Then his hand hit Frank in the chest. Dad went backward into the dining room table. He fell hard. I screamed his name. May slipped from my grip. Mr. Longneck caught her under both arms. He carried her toward the kitchen, exactly along the route she had described months earlier. Patio entrance, kitchen, living room, window, except now he was moving in reverse. Toward the open glass door, Nell stood beside the staircase. She did not follow. I ran after him. May kicked, put me down. The man ignored her. I grabbed the back of his coat. The fabric felt dry and stiff. He pulled me several feet. I caught the kitchen island. The coat stretched. Something inside the collar clicked rapidly. Frank got up. Blood ran from his elbow. He grabbed May's ankle. For several seconds, all 3 of us were pulling. The man reached the sliding entrance. Sunlight filled the opening. Outside was our deck. Nothing supernatural. Backyard, fence, neighbor's garage. Then I saw that the space beyond the glass was wrong. Not visually impossible at first. The deck looked longer, farther away. The railing seemed much more distant than it should have been. Between the kitchen threshold and the deck boards was a narrow strip of darkness, maybe 6 inches, then a foot, then wider. The more I looked, the farther away the deck became. Mr. Longneck stepped toward that gap. I screamed. May screamed too. Frank let go of her ankle long enough to grab the man's coat collar. His fingers closed around the lowest white band. He pulled. The entire stack shifted. The man's head tilted backward. One pearl stud popped free. Then another. The second collar opened. There was still no neck underneath. Instead, inside the white band were layers of tightly folded paper. Not skin. Paper, thin strips packed around whatever supported the head. Names were written on them. I saw handwriting. Blue ink, black ink, pencil, rows of names. Then the collar snapped shut again. Mr. Longneck turned toward Frank. His expression changed. For the first time, he looked angry. He released one arm from May and grabbed Dad's throat. Frank made a choking noise. I grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove. I swung it into the man's forearm. The impact numbed my hands. He let go of Dad. May slipped lower. I grabbed her pajamas. The shoulder seam tore. Frank pulled her free. She fell against him. I hit Mr. Longneck again. This time, the skillet struck his upper chest. One white collar split at the side. Several folded paper strips spilled onto the kitchen floor. The man made a sound, not a scream. A deep breath drawn through closed teeth. Then every cabinet in the kitchen opened. At once, plates fell. A glass shattered. Noah began screaming upstairs. The light fixtures flickered. Nell appeared beside the patio entrance. She looked at Mr. Longneck, then at the widening darkness beyond him. She said one word. Go. The man turned toward her. The 6 stacked collars rotated at different speeds. Nell stepped backward. He reached for her. She did something I did not expect. She kicked him. One small metal studded shoe struck his shin. He stumbled into the gap beyond the patio entrance. The darkness took his lower leg. He grabbed the frame. The glass panel shook. I saw his face change from anger to fear. Nell kicked his hand. The fingers opened. Mr. Longneck dropped backward. There was no falling sound. The deck snapped back into its normal position. Sunlight filled the threshold. Nell was gone. The broken security bar lay across the kitchen. The sliding entrance slammed shut by itself. The lock clicked. Then the house became completely still. Frank sat on the floor holding May. I dropped the skillet. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pick up my phone. Police and paramedics came. We did not tell them a man with stacked collars fell through an impossible gap. We said an intruder entered through the back and attacked us. They searched the property. No intruder, no footprints in the yard, no damaged fence, no open gate. The patio panel was locked. The wooden security bar was broken. The officers saw that. They also saw the dining table pushed several inches sideways. The fallen lamp, broken plates, my torn shirt, May's ripped pajama shoulder, Dad's bleeding elbow. He had bruising around the front of his neck and a cracked rib from hitting the table. May had 4 red marks beneath one arm where the man held her. One bruise near her ribs. My right wrist was badly swollen from swinging the skillet. There was physical evidence everywhere. The strangest pieces were on the kitchen floor. 3 pearl collar studs, 7 narrow strips of old paper. Police initially assumed they had fallen from a box during the struggle. I did not correct them. One strip had a name written on it. Arthur, another, Warren, another, Clara. Those names were in the notebook from the wall. That does not prove anything. Someone could have copied them. Except The notebook was 20 miles away at my sister's house. We had not brought it back. Frank was taken to the hospital. He stayed overnight for observation because of his heart history. May was physically fine. She told the police a tall man tried to take her outside. They asked what he looked like. She said too many shirts on his neck. The officer glanced at me. I said nothing. We moved out that week. Not sold. Moved, we stayed with my sister first. Then, rented a townhouse. The children never slept in the old property again. Luke and I went back only during daylight with other adults present. Nothing happened while we packed. No footsteps, no moving toys, no figures. Nothing, the absence almost made me doubt myself. Then our contractor inspected the patio entrance. He found something we had not noticed. The aluminum track had been bent downward in one section, not damaged by the broken security bar, compressed, as if a very heavy object had stood on the threshold. Beside that compression were several tiny round dents. They matched the diameter of the pearl collar studs. The contractor photographed them. We replaced the entire sliding assembly before listing the house. We also repaired the scratches in the living room, the damaged dining table, and the kitchen cabinets. The property sold the following spring. We did not tell the buyers about Mr. Longneck. We disclosed the police incident because legally we needed to disclose relevant property damage and repairs. We described it as an attempted home invasion by an unidentified person. That was technically the story in the police report. I still feel guilty about not telling them more. I also know exactly how I would have reacted if a seller told me a supernatural man sometimes came through the kitchen at nap time. I would have assumed they were unstable. Frank never fully recovered emotionally from what happened. Physically, his rib healed. The bruises faded. His heart remained fragile, but stable. He lived another 2 years. Those 2 years mattered. Our relationship was better than it had been since my mother died. He spent more time with May and Noah. He apologized again for the way he had withdrawn after Mom's death. I apologized for carrying anger without ever telling him what I needed. None of it became perfect. Real relationships don't. But when Dad died, there were no important things left unsaid. He had another cardiac event. This time, he was in the hospital. I sat beside him. I held his hand. I stayed. That mattered to me more than I can explain. After his funeral, May asked whether Grandpa was with Mr. Longneck now. My entire body went cold. Why would you ask that? She looked confused. Because Mr. Longneck takes people far away. No, my answer came too sharply. May flinched. I softened my voice. Grandpa isn't with him. Okay, did you see Mr. Longneck again? She shook her head. What about Nell? Another shake. Do you remember them? May thought about it, then shrugged. Not really. Children forget. Sometimes that is a mercy. By the time she was 6, she remembered almost nothing about the old house beyond the yellow bedroom and the backyard swing. Luke and I remembered enough for everyone. We kept the old tin. That sounds insane. We should have destroyed it. After the confrontation, my sister returned the plastic storage bin to us. The packet of pearl studs was still inside. 3 were missing. Exactly 3 had been recovered from our kitchen. The old notebook remained unchanged. No new names, no explanation. We put everything in a safe deposit box. That was where it stayed for years. I occasionally researched the names again. Never enough to build a complete story. Arthur Vedder worked as an insurance salesman. Clara was his wife. June was their daughter. Warren rented a room in the house for at least 1 year. There had been another family before them, several after. No newspaper report described a man named Mr. Longneck. No photograph showed anyone with stacked collars. I found one image of Arthur in a suit. Normal collar, normal neck. I stopped. I did not want an answer badly enough to invent one. May is 11 now. Noah is 9. We live in a newer house. No sliding glass entrance off the kitchen. No abandoned heating grills. No historical objects hidden in the walls. For years, nothing happened. Then, last month, Luke received a call from the man who bought our old property. Not the original buyer. The house had changed hands again. He found Luke's contact information and renovation paperwork we left behind. The man was remodeling the kitchen. He asked whether we knew of an old passage between the kitchen and living room. Luke said no. The new owner explained that when workers removed cabinets near the patio wall, they found a narrow vertical cavity, not large enough to walk through, more like a channel. Inside were several objects. He thought they might belong to us. Luke put the call on speaker. The man described an old child's toy, a plastic farm toy with a cow inside. My stomach dropped. Luke asked him to repeat it. The man laughed. Yeah, weird thing to find in a wall. We had taken that toy to a county disposal facility. I watched an employee dump our bag into a large industrial container. The new owner had also found a child's drawing. Yellow crayon hair. A man in a black coat. Several white rectangles stacked between his shoulders and head. 2 little figures stood beside him. One blonde. One with brown hair. He asked whether one of our children had drawn it. Neither had. At least not that I remembered. Luke told him to throw everything away. The man laughed again, then said there was one more thing. A folded strip of paper. He read the name written on it. Frank, my father's name. I took the phone. Where exactly did you find that? In the wall, with the toy? Yeah, was anything else written? He said there was a number. I asked, what number? He told me it was the age my father was when he died. I ended the call. Luke wanted to contact the police. There was nothing to report. A piece of paper inside a house we used to own is not a crime. The next morning, I drove to our bank. I opened the safe deposit box. The metal tin was still there. The notebook was inside. So were the catalogs, postcards, photographs, and packet of pearl studs. I opened the notebook. The old names were unchanged. Arthur, Clara, June, Warren, others I never identified. Then I reached the final page. I had looked at that page dozens of times. It had always been blank. There were 3 names on it now. Frank, May, Noah. Frank's name had a line drawn through it. May's did not. Neither did Noah's. I have never liked stories where a 4-year-old says something creepy and every adult in the room immediately decides the child must be talking to a ghost. 4-year-olds say bizarre things constantly. They misunderstand television. They combine conversations they overheard 3 weeks apart. They invent people. They remember details adults forget telling them. They take a completely ordinary fact and repeat it in a way that sounds terrifying because they do not yet understand which parts of a sentence are supposed to reassure you. I knew all of that when my son began talking to Alice. For a long time, it was enough. My wife and I bought the house in 2012 in a small city in western Massachusetts. It was much older than anything we had expected to own. The tax records gave 1891 as the construction year, although a contractor later told us parts of the foundation might have been older. From the street, it looked like a large but ordinary wood frame home with pale gray siding, a deep front porch, and 3 narrow windows across the second floor. The building had once been divided into rented rooms. That much we knew before closing. The realtor described it as a former boarding house that had been converted back into a single-family residence sometime after World War II. We did not care. If anything, I thought it made the place interesting. The unusual layout should probably have told us more about its past than the realtor did. The front entrance opened into a wide hallway. On the right was the living room. Across from it was a smaller sitting room that we eventually used as my office. Behind the living room was the dining room, and behind that was the kitchen. The kitchen was enormous for a house of that age. It had 2 windows facing the backyard, an exterior door onto a covered porch, and a walk-in pantry along the interior wall. There was also a narrow secondary staircase hidden behind a door near the refrigerator. That staircase went from the kitchen to the second-floor hall. It was much steeper than the main staircase near the front entrance and barely wide enough for one adult. The previous owner called it the servants' stairs. We mostly used it for laundry baskets. The second floor had 4 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. Our bedroom was at the front. Our son, Ben, slept in the room directly behind ours, overlooking the side yard. 2 smaller rooms at the rear became a guest room and storage room. A 3rd level had been finished badly sometime in the 1970s. We called it the attic, even though it technically contained 2 rooms. One became a playroom. The other stayed mostly empty because the ceiling leaked during heavy rain. The basement was unfinished. The stairs descended from the pantry. Down there were stone foundation walls, a newer furnace, a water heater, laundry hookups left from an earlier renovation, and several small rooms divided by old wooden partitions. One of those rooms still had numbers painted above hooks in the wall, 1 through 8. We assumed they had been used for tenants. Nothing about the place frightened us when we moved in. It needed work. That was different. The pipes complained. The floor sloped. Several doors refused to stay open unless you wedged something under them. The dining room ceiling had a stain from a leak repaired years before. The pantry smelled faintly of onions no matter how many times my wife scrubbed it. The kitchen cabinets were ugly. The basement was damp. It was a house. Our son loved it immediately. Ben was 4. He had light brown hair, a serious little face, and the habit of talking continuously when he played alone. Not normal talking either. He narrated everything. A toy truck did not simply drive across the carpet. Ben would announce where the driver worked, what he ate for lunch, why the bridge had collapsed, which dinosaur owned the road, and what everybody's grandmother thought about the situation. We never worried when we heard him speaking in an empty room. If Ben was quiet for 10 minutes, that was when we became suspicious. The first mention of Alice happened about 6 weeks after we moved in. I was making dinner. My wife, Rachel, was upstairs folding laundry. Ben was sitting underneath the dining table with several plastic animals. I heard him say, "No, he doesn't want soup." Pause, then, because he's a lion. Another pause. "No, lions don't like that." I assumed he was assigning voices to his toys. A few minutes later, Rachel came downstairs. She stood near the dining room entrance listening. Ben said, "You can give him bread." Rachel smiled at me. "Who's he talking to?" Probably the lion. She crouched beside the table. "Hey, buddy, who are you talking to?" Ben looked up. "Alice." Rachel glanced at me. "Who's Alice?" "The kitchen lady." We both laughed, not because it was creepy, because he said it as if we were stupid for asking. Rachel said, "What kitchen lady?" Ben went back to his toys. "Alice, is she your friend?" "She feeds them." "Feeds who?" he sighed. "The men." That got my attention. "What men?" "The ones who sleep here." Rachel and I looked at each other. We had mentioned the boarding house history around him. At least, I thought we had. We had talked about it while moving. My father had visited and joked that the place must have held 20 people. Ben might easily have overheard. Rachel asked, "Where are the men now?" Ben looked toward the kitchen. "They went away." Where did Alice go? He placed a toy giraffe on its side. She can't go. Why? Ben leaned closer to the giraffe as though the conversation had become boring. She died because she couldn't breathe. Rachel's expression changed. Mine probably did too. I asked, "Who told you that?" "Alice. Where is Alice?" He pointed toward the pantry. Then he made the giraffe attack the lion. That was the entire conversation. Later, after Ben went to bed, Rachel asked whether I had told him anyone died in the house. I hadn't. She hadn't either. We knew nothing about any deaths. I said he had probably heard something at preschool. A teacher's name. A story. Maybe a child had talked about someone dying. Rachel agreed. Neither of us was especially interested in ghosts. The next morning, Ben asked for pancakes. Alice disappeared from conversation for nearly a week. Then, Rachel heard him upstairs. She was changing the sheets in our bedroom. Ben was playing in his room. He said, "You have to knock." A few seconds passed. Then he laughed. "No, Daddy doesn't sleep there." Rachel walked into his room. He was sitting beside the old heating register near the wall. There were wooden blocks around him. She asked what he was doing. "Talking to Alice?" "Yes, where is she?" Ben pointed at the baseboard. Rachel said, "Is she in the wall?" "No, downstairs." That made no sense. "Then how are you talking to her?" Ben shrugged. "She hears through the pipes. Rachel told me about it after work." I went upstairs and looked at the register. Our house no longer used the old system connected to it. The furnace had been replaced, and several original floor vents were decorative remnants. There was no open duct beneath the register, only a shallow cavity ending at a piece of metal. That actually reassured me. A child sees an old grill and imagines people speaking through it. Normal, then Ben began setting places at the dining table. The first time, Rachel found an extra spoon beside an empty chair. She assumed she had done it automatically. The next evening, there was a small plate on the floor near the pantry. Ben had placed 2 crackers and a slice of apple on it. Rachel asked why. For Alice. We explained that food stays at the table. He became upset, not tantrum upset. Worried she has to bring it. "Bring it where?" I asked. "Down to the basement," he nodded. "For who?" "The men." I told him there were no men downstairs. Ben looked at me for a long time, then said, "Not now." That phrase bothered me more than it should have. I removed the plate. The following morning, it was back beside the pantry. The crackers were gone. The apple slice remained. It had browned around the edges. I assumed Ben had gotten up during the night. Rachel thought the same thing. We put a child-proof cover on his bedroom doorknob. That sounds ridiculous for a 4-year-old, but our main staircase was steep, and we did not want him wandering through an unfamiliar house half asleep. The plate did not appear again. For several weeks, things were normal. Then my mother died. She had been sick for a long time with pulmonary fibrosis. The disease slowly scarred her lungs until breathing became work. There were oxygen tanks, appointments, hospital admissions, a period where she seemed to improve. Then, another infection. She died in January, about 4 months after we moved into the house. Ben called her Nana Joe. They had been extremely close. My mother had lived 20 minutes away and watched him twice a week. She read the same books repeatedly without complaining. She let him help make biscuits. She kept a drawer in her kitchen filled with wooden spoons, plastic containers, and other things he was allowed to play with. When she became too sick to babysit, Ben did not understand why. Toward the end, he became frightened of her oxygen equipment. I regret how I handled that. I was trying to be both a father and a son, while knowing I was failing at both. My mother wanted to see Ben during her final hospital stay. Rachel thought we should take him. I said no. Mom looked terrible. She could barely speak without becoming exhausted. I did not want Ben's final memory of his grandmother to be that. At least, that was what I told myself. The truth was that I did not want to watch my mother say goodbye to my child. I was tired. I was angry. I had spent months hearing doctors use careful language around facts everyone understood. I wanted to keep one part of my life away from the hospital. Mom died 2 days after asking to see him. Ben never got that goodbye. For years, I carried more guilt about that than I admitted. After the funeral, he kept asking when Nana would come home. We explained death in the simple way recommended for children. Her body stopped working. She couldn't come back. We could remember her. We could love her. She would not walk through the door again. Ben listened. Then he asked, because she couldn't breathe? I felt something twist inside me. Yes, he nodded. Like Alice. Rachel looked at me. I had almost forgotten Alice. That night I asked Ben where he heard that Alice couldn't breathe. He was lying in bed, holding a stuffed bear. She told me. What happened to her? Smoke? Rachel was standing in the doorway. Neither of us spoke. Ben continued. She went down because somebody was yelling. Down where? The food room. Pantry? He shook his head. Under? The basement? No, I asked what under meant. He became frustrated. The little downstairs. We did not have a little downstairs. I asked if Alice looked like Nana. No. Is she old? No. Is she a kid? He thought about it. She's big. Adult, I assumed. What does she look like? Ben gave the useless kind of description children give. She has hair. What color? Brown. What is she wearing? The white thing. An apron? He nodded. Then he added something that I remember word for word. Her neck opens when she talks. I asked what he meant. Ben placed 4 fingers across the front of his throat, then separated them slightly, like this. Rachel told him it was time to sleep. We went downstairs. She did not say anything until we reached the kitchen. Then, I don't like this anymore. Neither did I. We made an effort not to discuss Alice around Ben. If he brought her up, we redirected. We did not ask leading questions. I did not want to accidentally build a story for him. The details continued anyway. Alice did not like the new stove. Alice said the back kitchen door used to be somewhere else. Alice knew that men kept boots downstairs. Alice said one man was named Mr. Thomas and always wanted 2 eggs. Alice did not like oranges. Alice sang when she worked. Most of those details meant nothing. One did. Ben claimed there used to be a narrow door behind our refrigerator. There wasn't, at least not visibly. A few months later, we replaced the refrigerator with a smaller model. When the delivery crew pulled the old one away from the wall, we found a vertical seam in the plaster. There had once been a doorway. It had been closed and plastered over. The opening would have led into the secondary staircase. Our existing servant's stair door was 6 feet farther along the wall. At some point, someone had changed the kitchen access. Rachel stood staring at the outline. I asked Ben how he knew. He replied, Alice uses that one. The delivery men laughed. Rachel did not. I told myself an old doorway could be obvious to a child. Maybe he noticed the seam before we did. Maybe light hit the plaster differently. There were explanations. I became very attached to that sentence. There are explanations. I started saying it even when nobody asked. The first incident that genuinely frightened me happened in May. I woke shortly before 3 because I heard someone in the kitchen. Not footsteps. Kitchen work. A cabinet closing. Metal touching metal. Something being placed on the counter. I assumed Rachel was up. Her side of the bed was occupied. I listened. A drawer opened downstairs. Then the distinctive scrape of our heavy dining chairs. I got out of bed. The main hall was dark. Ben's bedroom door remained closed, The child-proof cover was still on the inside knob. I went downstairs. The kitchen light was on. I was certain we had switched it off. On the table were 6 bowls, not ours. They were white ceramic, shallow, with a thin blue line around each rim. I stood in the doorway. My first thought was that Rachel had found them while unpacking. Then I remembered we had been living there for 8 months. Every cabinet had been emptied and cleaned. I had never seen those bowls. A large serving spoon lay beside them. Steam rose from one. I stopped moving. There was food inside. Something like oatmeal. I could smell cinnamon. The other 5 bowls were empty. I walked closer. The food was warm, not vaguely warm, freshly hot. I touched the side of the bowl and pulled my hand away. I checked the stove. Off, no pots. Microwave empty. Nothing in the sink. I called Rachel downstairs. She came in wearing pajamas and immediately asked what I had done. Nothing. Where did those come from? I don't know. We checked Ben. Still asleep. We searched the lower floor. No intruder. Doors locked. Windows secure. Then, Rachel noticed the pantry. The basement entrance was open. We always kept it latched because the stairs were dangerous for Ben. The hook hung loose. I took a flashlight. Rachel told me not to go down. I said if somebody was in the house, I needed to know. I checked the basement. Empty, the furnace ran normally. No exterior bulkhead door had been opened. A small window near the ceiling was locked. The old partitioned rooms contained boxes, tools, and nothing else. When I returned upstairs, Rachel had lined the 6 bowls along the counter. She wanted them out of the kitchen. We photographed them. The next morning, they were still there. That mattered. I washed one. The blue line around the rim had tiny breaks in it from age. The bottoms had no manufacturer's stamp. I put them in a box in the basement. They stayed. Nothing supernatural removed them. No convenient explanation appeared either. About 2 weeks later, my father visited. I showed him the bowls. He had no interest in ghost stories. His first explanation was that they had been left somewhere in the house by previous owners, and one of us had found them without remembering. With hot cereal inside? Rachel asked. Dad shrugged. I don't know about that part. He looked at me. You've been under a lot of stress. I knew what he meant. My mother. Grief. Poor sleep. I became defensive. Rachel told him she had seen them too. Dad changed the subject. That afternoon, while helping me move shelving in the basement, he noticed something behind one of the wooden partition walls. A door. It was not hidden exactly. Previous owners had built shelves directly in front of it, so only the upper edge was visible. We removed the shelving. The door was narrow, maybe 24 inches, shorter than normal. The old knob had been removed, and the hole covered with a metal plate. Dad asked what was behind it. I had no idea. The room on the other side should have been part of the foundation. We unscrewed the plate. The door stuck. Dad used a pry bar carefully. It opened inward. Behind it was a second staircase, very steep. Descending, I remember looking at Dad, the little downstairs. He didn't understand. Rachel did. She had followed us. Her face changed instantly. Ben said that. Dad looked between us. Said what? We told him. He said nothing for a while. The staircase went down only 7 steps into a small sub-basement beneath part of the kitchen. The floor was packed earth, stone walls, ceiling barely 6 feet high. There were no windows, no light fixture, no modern wiring. An old brick structure occupied one corner. Dad thought it might have been a coal storage area or cold room. Along the opposite wall was a long wooden table. Several metal hooks were mounted above it. A rusted rack leaned nearby. The room smelled stale. Earth, old brick. Something greasy, not rot. The smell of a kitchen after cooking meat, somehow preserved where no food had been prepared in decades. On the table were shallow circles in the dust, 6 of them, same diameter as the bowls upstairs. Dad saw that too. He touched one. The dust around his fingertip shifted. He said probably where dishes used to sit. Maybe the rest of the table was covered evenly. The 6 circles looked clean. Rachel wanted the door sealed again. I agreed. Before we closed it, I noticed marks on the brick structure. Long black streaks rose toward the ceiling, old smoke staining. Dad looked at them. Could have had a stove down here. Why? Boarding house. Big kitchen upstairs. Maybe this was food storage. Maybe laundry. He said maybe a lot. I appreciated it. We shut the door. I installed a bolt on the basement side. Then I placed the shelving back. That night, Ben woke crying. I went into his room. He was sitting upright. What happened? Alice is mad. Why? You shut her kitchen. I felt cold all over. I asked who told him. He pointed at the heating register. I knelt and placed my ear near it. Nothing, Ben said. She needs to feed everybody. There isn't anybody to feed. He looked at me like I had misunderstood. The next morning, the 6 bowls were on the dining table again. I had boxed them in the basement. The cardboard box remained there. Empty, I threw the bowls away. Not in our trash. I took them to a dumpster behind my office. For 3 nights, nothing happened. On the 4th, Ben began sleepwalking. He had never done that before. Rachel found him at 1 a.m, standing in the pantry. He was wearing dinosaur pajamas, bare feet, eyes partly open. The basement door was open. Rachel grabbed him before he reached the first step. He woke screaming, not because she startled him. He looked toward the basement and screamed, "She's choking." I came downstairs. Rachel carried him into the living room. He coughed several times. His breathing sounded normal. I checked the carbon monoxide detector. 0. Smoke detectors fine. No unusual smell. Ben kept saying Alice needed air. We calmed him. The following day, I bought 2 additional carbon monoxide detectors. One went in the basement, another upstairs. All readings remained normal. I also had the furnace inspected. No leak, no combustion problem, no explanation. A week passed, then a smell started appearing upstairs. Cooked onions, only at night. It would begin near Ben's room, move along the hall, then fade by the secondary staircase. Rachel thought something might be dead inside the wall. We called pest control. They found no rodents. The smell did not resemble decomposition anyway. It was food. Onions, butter, sometimes broth. Once coffee. One night I smelled bacon so clearly that I went downstairs expecting to find the stove on. Nothing. The incidents would have remained strange, but manageable if Alice had stayed an imaginary cook. Then Ben started changing. He became secretive. Not dramatically. He stopped telling us what Alice said. If Rachel asked, he would answer, nothing. If I entered his room while he was talking, he became quiet immediately. He began saving food. Pieces of toast disappeared into his pockets. Half a sandwich vanished from his lunch plate. Rachel found crackers beneath his pillow. We explained that food in bedrooms attracted insects. Ben became upset. Alice needs it. For what? He shook his head. For who? He whispered, the hungry ones. I asked whether the men had come back. He said some. Where are they? He pointed down. Then added, they don't have faces when they're hungry. That was the first thing he ever said that sounded like a conventional child's horror story. I almost found that reassuring. Monsters without faces? Kids invent that. I told him Alice was pretend. I expected an argument. Instead, he looked hurt, then frightened. You shouldn't say that. Why? She hears you. I made a mistake. I laughed, not cruelly. Nervously, Ben began crying. Rachel told me to stop. I apologized. That night, something happened in our bedroom. We woke simultaneously because the mattress dipped between us. Not at the foot. In the middle. As if a small person had put one knee on the bed. Rachel gasped. The pressure shifted. Then another point pressed down closer to my hip. I turned on the lamp. Nothing. The mattress slowly rose. Rachel sat up. I checked beneath the bed. Empty, then we heard Ben laughing in his room. I went across the hall. He was asleep. I stood there listening. The laughter came again, not from his mouth, from the heating register. A woman's laugh. Soft, brief, I backed away. Rachel was behind me. She heard it too. Neither of us said there were explanations that night. The next morning, I removed the register cover. Solid metal behind it. No duct. I unscrewed the decorative grate completely and put it in the garage. For several days, the house stayed quiet. Then we found scratches on the wall where the register had been. 4 horizontal lines, each about 3 inches long. They were not deep. They looked as though something had dragged across the paint from inside the wall. There was no open cavity behind that section. The plaster was solid. I photographed them. A month later, they were still there. My father saw them. So did Rachel's sister. Whatever else happened, those marks were real. Around then, Rachel started asking whether we should move. Financially, that would have been difficult. We had put almost everything into the house. There were closing costs, renovations, a mortgage we could barely afford. I told her we needed evidence of an actual danger before uprooting Ben. She said, "You mean more danger?" I knew what she meant. I also knew moving would mean admitting something I still resisted. I did not want a ghost. I wanted bad wiring, a neighbor with a key, a structural cavity, a sleep disorder, anything that belonged to the world I understood. So I bought cameras. One faced Ben's bedroom doorway from the hall. Another covered the kitchen. A third pointed toward the pantry. I did not put one inside his bedroom. That felt invasive. The first few nights showed nothing. Then the kitchen camera captured the pantry door opening at 2:36 a.m. Nobody entered the frame. The door slowly moved inward. The basement entrance opened next. Then the camera image developed horizontal distortion. For 19 seconds, it showed almost nothing but gray bands. When the picture returned, a plate sat on the kitchen floor. There was bread on it. I watched the footage repeatedly. No person, no cut I could detect, nothing entering or leaving. I showed my father. He blamed a camera glitch for the distortion. He could not explain the plate. The bread was still there in the morning. Rachel threw it outside. The next night, something else appeared. A white cloth, folded on the pantry floor. Rachel picked it up. It was an apron, old-fashioned. Cotton, yellowed with age. One pocket had been repaired with blue thread. There were dark stains near the bottom that looked like grease. We had never seen it before. I put it in a plastic storage bin. The apron remained there. Unlike the bowls, it did not move. I still have photographs of it. The most disturbing feature was not visible until Rachel washed her hands afterward. There was soot on her fingers. Not dirt. Black, fine residue. The apron itself did not look burned. I took it outside and shook it. Nothing came off. Yet the inside of the pocket left a dark smear on a white paper towel. We sealed it in a bag. That was physical evidence number 2. The incident that finally involved another adult happened during Ben's 5th birthday party. Nothing huge. Family. 2 neighborhood children. Cake, balloons, my father. Rachel's sister, Megan the Kids, played upstairs while the adults stayed mostly in the kitchen and dining room. At some point, Megan went upstairs to use the bathroom. She came back quickly. She looked at Rachel and said, "Who is the woman?" Every conversation stopped. "What woman?" I asked. "The one in Ben's room." Nobody answered. Megan looked around. "Is she somebody's mom?" Rachel asked what she looked like. "Brown hair, white dress or apron." I only saw her from the side. I put down my drink. Megan became uncomfortable. "What? Was Ben in there?" "No, he's in the playroom with the other kids." I went upstairs. Ben's room was empty. The window was closed, closet empty. No person could have left without passing the hall camera. We checked footage. At 3:14, Megan walked toward the bathroom. She stopped outside Ben's room. She leaned slightly toward the doorway, then continued. No woman appeared on camera. Megan insisted someone stood inside. She described one additional detail. I thought she had something wrong with her neck. I asked what. She touched the front of her throat. It looked striped. That description matched nothing I had told her. Rachel had never spoken to Megan about what Ben said. I asked her to explain. Megan said the woman's throat looked as if there were several narrow horizontal creases across it. She assumed they were shadows from the blinds. Ben's blinds were vertical. I did not correct her. After the party, Rachel cried. We agreed to start looking for another house. Then, my father had a stroke. Not severe. He survived. But the next several months became doctors, rehabilitation, insurance, and driving back and forth to appointments. Moving got pushed aside. That is one of the parts I regret. When life becomes complicated, people adapt to frightening things faster than they should. You start saying, yes, the pantry opened by itself, but Dad has physical therapy tomorrow. Yes, our son talks to a dead kitchen worker, but the car needs brakes. Yes, we found an old apron on the floor, but the mortgage payment is due. Normal responsibilities are powerful. They can make insanity feel domestic. Alice became part of the background again. Then Ben stopped eating breakfast. He said he wasn't hungry. At preschool, his teacher mentioned he seemed tired. Rachel began weighing him. He had lost almost 3 pounds. That was significant for a child his size. We took him to the pediatrician. Blood work normal. No stomach illness. No obvious anxiety disorder, beyond what the doctor called adjustment stress, following my mother's death and my father's illness. We did not tell the pediatrician about Alice. I wish we had. One morning, Rachel made scrambled eggs. Ben stared at them. Alice says those are wrong. What? She doesn't make them like that. Rachel put down the spatula. You're eating Mommy's eggs. Ben shook his head. She says I can eat downstairs. That ended breakfast. Rachel carried the plate to the sink. I asked Ben whether he had been in the basement. He said no. Has Alice taken you there? He looked at me. Not answering was the answer. I checked his feet. There was dirt underneath his toenails. Packed brown soil. The sub-basement had an earth floor. His bedroom did not. I felt sick. We had a child-proof cover on his door, an alarm at the top of the main staircase, a camera in the hall. There was no footage showing him leaving his bedroom. I asked when he went downstairs. Ben began crying. She says I can't tell. I raised my voice. Rachel stopped me. We moved the camera into his room that afternoon. For 2 nights, nothing happened. On the 3rd, the camera stopped recording from 1:08 to 1:43. No power outage, no other camera failed. At 1:44, the image returned. Ben was asleep. His feet were dirty. On the carpet beside the bed was a small piece of bread. I did not go to work that morning. I called a locksmith. Then, a contractor. We put an actual keyed lock on the basement entrance high enough that Ben could not reach it. I sealed the hidden sub-basement door with screws through the frame. We also put a motion sensor in the pantry. That night, shortly after midnight, every smoke detector in the house activated. All at once. There was no smoke. I got Ben. Rachel checked the first floor. I called the fire department because I was not taking chances. Firefighters arrived. They inspected the furnace, kitchen, walls, attic, electrical panel, and basement. Nothing. Carbon monoxide readings normal. No active fire. One firefighter noticed the soot marks above the hidden sub-basement door. I told him they were old. He agreed they looked old. Then, he asked something that stuck with me. Why is it warmer here? I thought he meant the furnace. He pointed toward the sealed door. The basement around us was around 60 degrees. The wood covering that entrance was warm. Not hot, noticeably warmer than the surrounding wall. He used an infrared thermometer. The center measured 84 degrees. The edges measured 61. We had no heating duct behind it. The firefighter suggested there might be a hot water pipe in the wall. There wasn't. I checked the next morning. The wood had returned to basement temperature. I unscrewed the door. The sub-basement smelled strongly of cooked meat. The 6 clean circles had reappeared in the dust on the table. I had wiped that table weeks earlier. Beside the circles was a 7th, smaller, child-sized bowl. I shut the door and screwed it closed again. That afternoon, Ben asked why I locked Alice out of her room. I said, because you're not going there. His face became serious. She says Nana couldn't breathe either. I had not told him why I was upset. I said nothing. He continued. She says you didn't take me. My stomach dropped. What? To Nana. Rachel was standing behind me. Ben looked at both of us. She wanted me there. That sentence broke something in me. I had never told Ben that my mother asked to see him. Rachel knew. My father knew. Nobody else. Ben had been 4. He wasn't in the room when Mom and I argued about whether to take him to the hospital. I crouched in front of him. Who told you that? Alice. What exactly did she say? Rachel said my name, warning me not to push. I ignored her. What did she say? Ben's eyes filled. She said, Nana waited and you didn't bring me. I stood so fast the chair behind me fell. I walked into the pantry. I did not know whether I was angry at a ghost, a house, myself, or all 3. I opened the basement door. I shouted into the darkness. Leave him alone. Rachel grabbed my arm. Stop, I shouted again. Do you hear me? Something moved below. One slow scrape. Then another. The basement lights went out. The kitchen remained on. From downstairs came the sound of a woman coughing. Not theatrical. Wet. Desperate. A person trying to pull air through a throat that would not open. Rachel pulled me backward. The coughing moved up the basement stairs. I slammed the door. The keyed lock turned by itself. Not from my hand. The metal rotated into the locked position. We stood there. Then the coughing came from the other side of the pantry wall. Inside the kitchen. Rachel screamed. Ben began crying. I grabbed him and carried him outside. We stayed at a hotel for 2 nights. Nothing followed us. Ben did not mention Alice. He ate normally. He slept better than he had in weeks. That should have been enough. We should have moved into an apartment and dealt with the financial consequences later. Instead, we returned because we needed clothes, documents, medication, and because humans are very good at convincing themselves that a frightening event becomes less dangerous once daylight arrives. The house felt normal. The pantry lock worked. No smell, no coughing. We packed. Bags. Rachel wanted to leave that afternoon. I agreed. Then Ben disappeared. It happened in less than 5 minutes. He was in the living room watching cartoons. Rachel went upstairs for clothes. I was in my office gathering paperwork. When I came back, the television was still playing. The couch was empty. I called his name. No answer. I checked the bathroom, kitchen, dining room. Rachel came down. "What? Where's Ben?" Her face changed. We searched. Front door locked, back door locked, windows closed. His shoes were beside the stairs. Then we heard him laugh. From the basement. I ran to the pantry. The basement entrance remained locked. I had the key. I opened it. Ben. Nothing. I went down. Rachel stayed at the top, calling 911. The main basement was empty. Then I saw the shelving. It had been moved. The screws sealing the sub-basement door lay on the floor. All 8. Not ripped out. Unscrewed, the narrow door stood open. Warm yellow light came from below. There was no electric light in that room. I heard Ben talking. I went down the 7 steps. The room had changed. Not impossibly larger. Not dramatically. That almost made it worse. It looked like a kitchen. The same stone walls. Same earth floor. But the old brick structure in the corner glowed faintly as if a fire burned behind it. A long wooden table held 6 bowls. Steam rose from them. Ben sat on a small chair at the far end. Beside him stood a woman. Alice, I knew before seeing her clearly. She looked younger than I expected. Maybe 30. Brown hair pinned at the back. Plain, dark dress. White apron. Ordinary face. Not corpse-like. Not pale. Not beautiful in a supernatural way. She looked tired. Then she turned toward me. Her throat was wrong. From just below her chin to the top of her collarbone were 5 horizontal folds. Not wounds, not scars. They resembled narrow, overlapping shutters made of skin. With every breath, the folds separated slightly. Darkness showed between them. Not blood, not tissue. Darkness, when she inhaled, those narrow openings widened. I could hear air entering through them, a dry paper like flutter. Her mouth barely moved. The throat did the breathing. She placed one hand on Ben's shoulder. I stopped. Get away from him. Ben turned. Daddy, he sounded calm. I moved closer. Alice's expression changed. Concern, almost irritation. Like I was interrupting a meal. One of the bowls contained oatmeal. Another stew. Another eggs. Different foods. All hot. There were empty chairs around the table. Yet several depressions showed in the dirt beside them, as if people were standing there. Ben said, "Alice says everybody has to eat." I held out my hand. "Come here." He started to stand. Alice's fingers tightened on his shoulder. The folds in her throat opened wider. A man's voice came from somewhere behind me. "Sit." I turned. Nobody. Another voice from the other side. Then another, low murmuring. 6 different men speaking beneath one another. I could not understand the words. The room smelled of onions, broth, coffee, and smoke. I grabbed Ben. Alice moved faster than I expected. Her hand closed around my wrist. She felt real. Warm skin. Calloused palm. The throat openings widened. A blast of hot air hit my face. Not breath from her mouth. From those folds. I pulled. Her grip strengthened. Ben screamed. I struck her arm with my free hand. The contact felt completely physical. She did not release me. Instead, the skin along her throat separated farther. The 5 horizontal openings became deep black slits. Something behind them moved. Not flesh. Small points of warm light. Like distant stove burners seen through shutters. Then smoke began coming out. Thin gray strands. I coughed immediately. My eyes watered. I grabbed Ben around the waist. Alice pulled him back. For several seconds, the 3 of us struggled. She was not trying to hurt him. That was somehow worse. She kept smoothing his hair with her other hand as he cried. "Eat," she said. Her actual voice was soft, almost kind. then sleep. I kicked the chair away. It hit the table. A bowl fell. Hot food spilled across the dirt. Something invisible beside us reacted. A chair scraped backward. Another moved. The room filled with angry male voices. I heard feet where nobody stood. Alice looked toward the empty seats, then at me. Her expression changed from concern to panic. Don't wake them. I did not understand. Rachel screamed my name from the upper basement. I shouted back. Alice dragged Ben toward the brick structure. A narrow opening had appeared beside it. I had not noticed it before. A low doorway. Behind it was blackness. Ben kicked. I grabbed the apron. The fabric tore at the shoulder. Black residue burst into the air. Alice made a terrible choking sound. Her hand released my wrist. I pulled Ben toward the stairs. Then something caught my shirt from behind. No visible hand. I was yanked backward. The collar tightened around my throat. Ben slipped from my grip. Alice caught him. Rachel appeared at the bottom step holding a hammer. She saw the woman. I know she did because she stopped completely. Alice turned toward her. The throat folds fluttered. Rachel whispered, "Oh my God." Then she swung the hammer. The metal head struck Alice's forearm. There was a solid crack. Alice recoiled. Ben ran toward me. I grabbed him. The invisible grip behind me pulled again. My shirt tore. Rachel hit empty space beside my shoulder. Something grunted. A man's voice, then another. I could smell sweat and tobacco mixed with the smoke. The bowls began moving across the table, not sliding together, different directions, as if 6 unseen people were eating. Spoons lifted. One struck the floor. A chair toppled. Alice backed toward the brick structure. Her expression was frightened now. Not of us, of the room. "Too many awake," she said. The earth beneath one empty chair compressed. A boot print appeared, then another. A row of impressions moved toward Rachel. I shouted for her to run. We went up the 7 steps. Something followed. Heavy footsteps. Ben screamed. I shoved him toward Rachel. The narrow door began closing. I grabbed it. A force from the other side pulled. My fingers were almost crushed between the edge and frame. Rachel put Ben behind her and helped me. For several seconds, we fought the door. Then, Alice appeared in the gap. Only part of her face visible. One eye, half her mouth. 3 of the throat slits. She said, "He needs looking after." I shouted, "He's my son." Her eye moved toward Ben. Men leave. The door jerked. My shoulder hit the frame. Rachel screamed. Then Ben said, "Alice, stop." Everything became still. The pulling ceased. The male voices below stopped. Alice looked at him. Ben was crying. He said, "I don't want your food." Her face changed. Not anger. Grief. For a moment, she looked completely human. Then the folds across her throat opened all at once. Smoke poured through the gap. I slammed the door. Rachel drove screws back through the frame while I held it shut. We did not wait for police. We took Ben outside. Officers arrived because Rachel's 911 call had remained connected. We told them someone had been in the basement. They searched. Nobody. The sub-basement was empty. No Alice, no men, no fire. The bowls remained. 6 adult-sized bowls and 1 smaller one. Food remained in 3. Cold now. The table had been knocked sideways. 1 chair was broken. My shirt was torn at the collar and down the back. There were bruises around my wrist. Rachel had a long red mark across one forearm. Ben had 5 fingertip-shaped bruises on his shoulder. Those marks lasted almost a week. Police photographed them. They also photographed the footprints. There were several shoe impressions in the earth, different sizes, work boot patterns. One set ended directly at the stone wall. No opening, no door, nothing beyond except foundation. The police treated the incident as a possible intruder situation. They suggested someone might have entered through an old foundation opening and escaped. A contractor later found no such entrance. The officers took the torn piece of apron Rachel had grabbed. I had not realized she still held it. White cotton. Blue repair thread stood inside the pocket, the same apron we had sealed in a plastic bag months earlier. When we checked the storage bin later, it was empty. The sealed bag was still there, cut open along one side. We never spent another night in the house. We rented a small apartment. It was financially painful. I did not care. Ben improved almost immediately. His appetite returned. The sleepwalking stopped. He stopped talking to Alice. For several months, he refused to discuss her. Then, one afternoon, he asked whether she was lonely. I told him I didn't know. She had the men. Ben shook his head. They weren't her friends. What were they? He thought about it. Hungry, that was all he would say. We sold the house the following year. Before listing it, I had the sub-basement professionally inspected. The contractor noticed evidence that the brick structure had once been a cooking stove or furnace. He also found old ventilation openings in the stone wall that had been filled during renovations. Could somebody have died from smoke or carbon monoxide down there? Absolutely. Did Alice? I don't know. We never found a death certificate. I did not spend nights searching newspaper archives until a perfect explanation appeared. I did not want one. The house had been a boarding house. Many people lived there. Many people cooked there. Someone named Alice may have existed. Or Ben may have invented that name. There are thousands of women named Alice. The details did not become more convincing simply because they sounded historical. What I know is smaller and harder. My 4-year-old described a hidden lower room before we knew it existed. He said a woman fed men there. We found a long table and the impressions of 6 bowls. He said she died because she could not breathe. We found smoke staining and sealed ventilation. He described something unusual across her throat. Years later, my wife and I both saw the same feature without discussing what it should look like in that moment. Those facts are enough for me. My father died 4 years after we moved. Another stroke. This time there was no recovery. I sat beside him in the hospital. That mattered. After losing my mother, I had become terrified of choosing absence again. I stayed until the end. Ben was 9 by then. I asked if he wanted to see Grandpa beforehand. He said yes. I took him. I did not decide for him. My father was weak but awake. Ben held his hand. They talked about baseball. Nothing supernatural happened. No message came afterward. No dream changed everything. My father simply died. Grief was painful and ordinary. I found that strangely comforting. Ben is 17 now. He barely remembers Alice. At least, that is what he says. When I asked him recently, he remembered the name, the basement, and being frightened. He did not remember telling us she fed men. He did not remember the description of her death. He did not remember the folds across her throat. I have never shown him the police photographs. I don't know whether I will. Rachel and I kept copies. The bruises, the footprints, the old bowls, the torn apron, the bent sub-basement door. We also kept one object I wish we hadn't. The small bowl. The one set in front of Ben. After the police finished, I put it in a cardboard box with some other evidence. When we moved, that box came with us. I forgot about it. Years later, while cleaning the garage, Rachel found the bowl. She wanted to throw it away. I said yes. She put it in the trash. The next morning, it was on the kitchen counter. I assumed one of us had changed our mind. Rachel hadn't. Neither had Ben. I threw it away myself. A week later, it appeared inside a cabinet. That happened in our new house. I smashed it. I did not want to test anything further. I put the pieces in separate trash bags and took them to different dumpsters. Nothing came back. For nearly 8 years, that was the end. Then, last winter, Ben came home from school with 2 friends. They were in the kitchen making frozen pizza. I was working in my office. One of his friends called out, "Mr. Carter?" I went in. The boy was pointing at our pantry. "Do you have somebody in there?" The pantry door was closed. "No," he looked embarrassed. "I thought a woman went in." Ben stopped moving. I looked at him. He was staring at the pantry. I asked his friend what the woman looked like. Ben immediately said, "Don't." That frightened me more than the answer would have. His friend laughed nervously. "I don't know. Brown hair. White apron, maybe." Ben left the kitchen. I followed him upstairs. He shut his bedroom door behind us. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then I lied. About what? Remembering her. I sat down. Ben stayed near the window. He told me Alice never stopped appearing completely. Not in the apartment. Not in every house. Years might pass. Then he would see her somewhere in the background. At the end of a school hallway. Across a grocery store. Standing outside a restaurant kitchen. Never close. Never speaking. Always watching him. I asked why he had not told us. "Because you moved us once already." "Ben, I knew what it did to you." I told him that was not his responsibility. He shrugged. Then he said something worse. "She isn't always alone." I asked what he meant. He looked at the floor. "Sometimes there are men behind her." I waited. "What do they look like?" "I can't see their faces." I felt the old cold sensation return. "How many?" Ben said he never counted. I asked whether she had ever spoken since the basement. "Once, 2 years earlier. He was getting food from our refrigerator after midnight." He looked toward the dark dining room. Alice stood there. The folds across her throat were barely open. Behind her were several tall shapes. She told him, "They're hungry again." Ben turned on every light. The room was empty. He never told us. I asked if anything physical had happened. He hesitated. Then rolled up his sleeve. There was a faint mark on the inside of his upper arm. Not bruising. 5 pale lines. Old scars. He said he woke with them after that night. Rachel had assumed they came from sports. I never knew. We checked the pantry after his friends left. Nothing. No apron. No bowl. No soot. The house remained quiet. I started hoping the sighting had been a coincidence. Then 3 nights later, I woke to the smell of onions. I sat upright. Rachel woke too. Neither of us spoke. The smell became stronger. Butter. Broth. Coffee. A full kitchen working somewhere downstairs. Then came a sound I had not heard in over a decade. Ceramic touching wood. 1 bowl. Another. Rachel grabbed my hand. We did not go downstairs. The sounds continued. 7 placements. Then silence. At dawn, I checked the kitchen. The table was empty. The pantry door stood open. Inside, on the floor, was a rectangle of white cotton. I did not touch it. Blue thread repaired 1 corner. Rachel came in behind me. She began crying. We called Ben downstairs. He stopped in the doorway. The 3 of us stared at the cloth. Then Ben looked toward the basement door. Our current house does not have a basement. There is only a shallow coat closet beneath the staircase. He pointed at it. "That's where she's standing." I saw nothing. Rachel saw nothing. Ben backed away. He said, "Her throat is closed." I asked what that meant. His face had gone gray. Before he could answer, something knocked from inside the closet. Not loudly. A dull impact. Then another. The door moved against its frame. I grabbed the handle. Rachel told me not to open it. I didn't. Something on the other side began coughing. A woman's cough. Wet, strained, fighting for air. Then a man's voice spoke from much farther back than the closet should have allowed. Breakfast? Another voice repeated it. Then a third. Ben whispered, "Dad." The door handle turned beneath my hand. I pulled back. The latch released. The door opened several inches. There should have been coats behind it. Instead, warm yellow light filled the gap. I smelled earth. Smoke, cooked oats. For perhaps 1 second, I could see a wooden table descending below the level of our floor. 6 adult bowls, 1 small one. Then Rachel slammed the door. I locked it. We left the house. When I returned with my brother-in-law that afternoon, the closet was normal. Coats, shoes, vacuum cleaner, no staircase, no soot, no food, nothing, except for one mark. On the inside of the door, about 4 feet above the floor, 5 narrow horizontal cuts had appeared in the paint. They were close together, each one curved slightly upward at both ends. My brother-in-law saw them. He asked what made them. I said I didn't know. We still live here. I know how that sounds after everything. Ben leaves for college next year. Rachel wants to move after he goes. I agree. The closet has not opened again. The white apron piece remains sealed in a container at my brother-in-law's house because Rachel refused to keep it under our roof. Last week, he called me. He thought I had stopped by while he was at work. I hadn't. When he came home, his kitchen table had been set for 7 people. 6 large bowls, 1 small, all empty. In the center was the sealed plastic container. The lid was still snapped shut. The piece of white cotton inside was gone. That evening, I checked Ben's room. He was asleep. On the chair beside his bed was an old apron, folded neatly. Across the front, just below the collar, 5 narrow openings had been cut through the fabric. Warm air was coming out of them. I was 8 when I stopped going upstairs alone. Before that, the upper floor of our house had been one of my favorite places. We lived outside Worcester, Massachusetts, in a 1.5-story Cape Cod that looked smaller from the road than it really was. My parents bought it when I was 6, about 9 months after my older sister, Molly, died. Molly was 12. She had been sick for most of the previous year with a heart condition that nobody had expected to become fatal so quickly. There were surgeries, hospital stays, stretches where she seemed almost normal, then another emergency. I was young enough that adults tried to protect me from the details, but old enough to understand that everyone in our family had become afraid of the telephone. One Tuesday morning, my father drove her to Boston because she was having trouble breathing. My mother told me she would probably be home in a few days. She never came back. For a long time after that, I became obsessed with the idea that families could change while you were at school. You could leave a cereal bowl in the sink, put on your backpack, and assume everyone you loved would still be there that afternoon. Then suddenly, one bedroom was empty. My parents handled Molly's death differently. Mom kept almost everything. Clothes, books, hair clips, birthday cards. A pair of white sneakers Molly had complained were uncomfortable. Dad wanted to remove things because seeing them hurt him. That caused arguments, not screaming fights, quiet ones. Those were worse. Eventually, they decided to move. The house we bought was older than the suburban place where Molly and I had grown up. It had been built sometime in the 1920s and expanded later. The ground floor had a living room facing the street, a dining area behind it, and a kitchen across the rear. My parents' bedroom was on the first floor beside a small bathroom. There was also a narrow den Dad used as an office. The staircase began between the dining room and living room. Upstairs was strange. The roof came down low on both sides, so the center section had normal headroom, while the outer edges sloped toward the floor. There were 2 bedrooms up there, mine at the front and a guest room at the back. Between the rooms was a landing large enough for a desk and a bookcase. Running behind both long walls were storage spaces beneath the roof. Calling them closets does not really describe them. Each one was more like a tunnel. The north eave ran along the entire left side of the upper floor, from the front of my bedroom to the rear guest room. The south one did the same thing on the opposite side. They were roughly 3 feet high near the inner wall and narrowed toward the roofline. An adult had to crawl. A child could move through them easily. There were 4 little access doors. One, in my bedroom, opened into the front section of the north eave. Another in the guest room connected to its far end. 2 matching doors gave access to the southern crawl space. That meant a kid could enter one room, crawl through the darkness behind the wall, and come out somewhere else. I thought this was incredible. My mother thought it was filthy. Dad inspected the spaces before we moved in. They contained old insulation, unfinished boards, several cardboard boxes left by the previous owner, and enough dust to make Mom forbid me from going inside without asking. I went anyway. For almost 2 years, nothing frightened me about those spaces. I used them as forts. I hid comic books there. My friend Jamie and I crawled through them with flashlights. Sometimes we brought pillows and pretended we were exploring caves. The boards beneath us creaked, but we knew where the stronger sections were. In winter, cold air came through the roof. In summer, the enclosed spaces became brutally hot. The north eave had one feature the southern side did not. About halfway through, there was a vertical timber wider than the other roof supports. It sat near an old brick chimney that had been sealed long before we moved in. To pass it, you had to flatten yourself against the floor and squeeze between the timber and the inner wall. Beyond that point, the crawl space always felt quieter. I don't mean supernatural. The bedrooms were farther away. Street noise became muffled. You could hear your own clothing dragging across wood. Jamie called the place beyond the beam the far half. The first time I saw the girl, we were trying to crawl through the north eave without using our flashlights. We had spent the afternoon daring each other to do stupid things. Jamie went first. I followed. We made it past the chimney support. Then he turned his flashlight back on. "You cheated," I said. "So did you." I had already switched mine on. We laughed. He continued toward the rear guest room. I was maybe 6 feet behind him. My flashlight was weak because the batteries were old. The beam looked yellow and faded at the edges. Halfway between the chimney and the rear access door, I noticed someone sitting against the sloped outer wall. At first, I thought Jamie had somehow crawled past me. Then I could still see the bottoms of his sneakers ahead. I stopped. There was a girl in the eave. She looked about my age, maybe slightly younger. Blonde hair cut just below her shoulders. A green dress with short sleeves, white socks, dark shoes. Nothing about her looked dead. No blood, no wounds, no gray skin. She was sitting with both knees drawn up, arms resting loosely around them. She seemed completely calm. That scared me more than anything monstrous would have. She looked as though she belonged there. The only thing I noticed that seemed wrong was her hair. Most of it hung naturally, but 4 or 5 strands on the left side did not. They stretched almost perfectly sideways, not upward, not floating randomly. They pointed deeper into the crawl space toward the rear of the house, as if some invisible current were pulling only those strands in one direction. There was no moving air. I could feel that clearly. The insulation around us did not shift. Dust stayed on the boards. The little hairs on my own arms were still. The blonde girl smiled, not widely, just enough to show that she had noticed me. Then she held out one hand. There was a red plastic building block in her palm. It was mine. I had lost it weeks earlier. I remember the exact block because one corner had teeth marks from when I used to chew on toys. I stared at it. The girl moved her hand a little closer. I did not take it. Jamie kept crawling. He had not noticed that I stopped. I whispered his name. He looked back. What? I pointed. The girl remained there. Jamie turned his flashlight toward the wall. The beam passed directly across where she was sitting. He frowned. What? You don't see her? Who? I looked back. She was still there. Same dress, same red block, same small smile. The sideways strands of hair now pointed toward the chimney instead of the rear access door. That was when I started moving. I did not scream. I didn't tell Jamie to run. I just crawled faster. He thought I was trying to race him. We reached the guest room access door. I shoved it open hard enough that it hit the wall. I got out and stood. Jamie came through behind me. What is wrong with you? I closed the little door. I remember my hands shaking so badly that the latch clicked against the frame several times before I managed to secure it. I told him there had been a girl inside. He laughed at first. Then he saw my face. He stopped. What girl? She was sitting by the wall. There wasn't anybody. She had my red block. Jamie looked toward the access door. He did not call me a liar. That mattered. He stood there for maybe 10 seconds, listening. Then he said, I don't want to go back in. Why? I don't know. He refused to explain. We went downstairs. Neither of us told my parents. For the rest of the afternoon, we stayed outside. Jamie went home before dinner. I slept downstairs on the couch that night. Mom found me there the following morning. She asked why. I said my room was too hot. It was October. She knew I was lying. I still didn't tell her. For the next few weeks, I avoided the North Eve. The south side remained fine. That difference became important in my mind. I could still open the southern access door to look for Christmas decorations or retrieve a board game. The northern one bothered me even during daylight. My bedroom access door had a small brass hook that dropped into an eye screw. I started making sure it was fastened before bed. Then I began putting a toy chest in front of it. That was the first thing my parents noticed. Dad moved the chest one afternoon because he needed access to something stored in the eave. I became upset. He asked why. I said I didn't like that door. He laughed. What, you finally figured out there are spiders in there? I told him I saw a girl. His smile disappeared. Not because he believed me. Because Molly had been a girl. My parents were sensitive to anything they thought might be connected to my sister. Dad crouched, so we were at eye level. What kind of girl? I described her. He asked if she looked like Molly. No. You sure? Molly had brown hair. The person in the crawl space looked nothing like her. Dad asked whether Jamie had seen anything. No, he nodded slowly. You probably saw insulation or a coat or something in the flashlight. She gave me my block. Dad looked at the floor. What block? I described it. He opened the north eave. I backed away. He crawled inside with a bright work light. 10 minutes later, he came out dusty and irritated. There was nobody. He had found several old boxes, but no red building block. He closed the door. Nothing in there. I told him I knew what I saw. Dad rubbed the back of his neck. Chris, sometimes when you're scared, your brain finishes shapes for you. I said I hadn't been scared until afterward. He did not have an answer for that. Mom handled it differently. She sat on my bed that evening. She asked if I had been thinking about Molly. I said no. That was not completely true. I thought about Molly every day. But I had not thought about her while crawling through the eave. Mom said dreams and memories could appear when we did not expect them. I became angry. I wasn't asleep. I know. Then why are you talking about dreams? I'm trying to understand. You think I'm making it up. I didn't say that. She did not have to. After that, I stopped talking about the girl. The access doors began opening around a month later. The first time happened while I was at school. Mom sent me upstairs after dinner to get a sweater from my room. I reached the landing and saw the north eave door standing open, maybe 10 inches. The toy chest was still against it, not directly in front anymore. It had been pushed aside. I stopped at the top of the stairs. My room was dark. The opening in the knee wall looked completely black. I called Dad. He came up. Did you leave that open? No, he went into my bedroom. The brass hook hung loose. The screw eye was intact. Dad looked at the toy chest. He asked if I had moved it. I said no. He told me to stay in the hall while he checked inside. Nothing. He secured the door again. 2 nights later, it opened while I was sleeping. I woke because the room was cold. The window was shut. My blanket had fallen partly onto the floor. Then I saw the little access door, wide open. The toy chest had shifted almost 2 feet. I turned on my bedside lamp. Nothing moved inside the eave. I ran downstairs. Dad came back up with me. This time he was annoyed. He thought I had opened it myself while half asleep. I insisted I hadn't. He examined the hook, still functional. He replaced it the next day with a sliding metal latch mounted higher on the door. For several weeks that worked. Then toys started disappearing. It began with small things. A matchbox car, 2 action figures, a baseball glove, a little stuffed raccoon I had owned since kindergarten. I blamed Jamie once because he had been over. He denied taking anything. Mom thought I was being careless. Then Dad lost one of his screwdrivers. That sounds unrelated, except he later found it inside the north eave, not near the entrance, beyond the chimney support, next to my missing glove. Dad brought both downstairs. He asked why I put them there. I said I hadn't. He told me lying would make everything worse. I started crying. That made him angrier because he thought I was trying to manipulate him. Mom intervened. They argued in the kitchen. I sat on the stairs and listened. My name came up. Then Molly's. Dad said, he's acting out. Mom said, he's 7. Dad replied, he's almost 8. I remember thinking that apparently turning 8 meant you were old enough to be blamed for things you could not explain. More objects appeared in the crawl space, not just mine. One evening, Mom opened a storage box looking for Christmas decorations. Inside was a small ceramic horse that had belonged to Molly. Mom had been keeping it in her bedroom dresser. She carried it downstairs. Her face was white. She asked whether I had taken it. I said no. Dad asked how I would even know where she kept it. Mom didn't answer. The ceramic horse went back into their bedroom. 2 mornings later, it was sitting on the floor outside my room. That caused the worst argument my parents and I had about the house. Dad accused me directly. Enough. I didn't do it. Then who did? I don't know. You keep saying that. Because I don't. He held the ceramic horse in one hand. This belonged to your sister. I know. Then stop using her things for games. I felt like he had hit me. I'm not. Chris, I'm not. Mom told Dad to calm down. I shouted that the blonde girl was doing it. The room went silent. Dad's face hardened. There is no girl. You didn't see her. Neither did Jamie. He felt her. Dad shook his head. This stops now. I told him I hated the house. He said maybe I wanted everyone else to hate it too. Mom told him that was enough. I ran upstairs. I slammed my bedroom door. Then I realized the north eave access was open. I stopped. The ceramic horse had been in Dad's hand downstairs. The crawl space was dark. Something moved far inside. Not a person walking. A soft scraping across the boards. I shut my bedroom door and pushed my dresser against it. For the first time, I heard something coming from behind the knee wall. A child's breathing, very slow. I sat on the floor with my back against the dresser until Mom came upstairs. I did not tell her what I had heard. That was around the time I stopped taking naps upstairs. Before then, Mom sometimes sent me to my room when I was tired or cranky. After the girl appeared, I would stay awake no matter how exhausted I became. Eventually, I refused to be upstairs at all unless someone else was home. At 8, I started sleeping on the living room sofa more often than my own bed. My parents thought this was becoming a behavioral problem. Maybe it was. They talked about taking me back to the therapist I had seen after Molly died. I told them I would rather sleep outside than in my room. Dad called that ridiculous. Mom looked worried. Neither one moved me downstairs permanently. The dog changed things. His name was Chester. He was a black Labrador mix my parents had adopted when Molly was still alive. Chester loved everyone. He chased squirrels. He jumped into ponds. He stole food from countertops. Thunder barely bothered him. If a door was open, Chester wanted to know what was behind it. He had been inside both Eaves spaces many times when we first moved in. He could not turn around easily, so he crawled forward until he reached the other access door. One Saturday morning, I decided Chester could prove whether I was imagining everything. My parents were asleep. It was still early. I found his leash downstairs. I clipped it to his collar and brought him up. Chester came willingly until we reached the final stair. Then he stopped. His front paws were on the second highest step. His back legs remained lower. I pulled gently. Come on. He leaned backward. I had never seen him do that. I tried again. He planted his paws. His body began trembling, not violently. A fine vibration through the leash. I sat beside him. What's wrong? Chester looked toward my bedroom. The north eave access door was closed, then it moved. The lower edge came forward. The metal slide latch was still engaged. I watched it. The door pressed outward against the latch. Once, then again, the screws gave a tiny creak. Chester growled. It was the deepest sound I had ever heard from him. The access door pressed outward harder. The top corner flexed. The latch held. Chester backed down another step. I was suddenly frightened enough to forget my plan. I tried taking him downstairs. Before we moved, something hit the inside of the knee wall. One solid impact. Chester bolted. The leash yanked through my hand. He ran down the staircase and crashed into the dining room table. My parents woke. Dad came out of their bedroom shouting. Mom followed. Chester hid behind the living room couch. He would not come near the stairs for the rest of the day. Dad went upstairs. The metal latch on the access door was bent slightly away from the wood. Not broken. Bent, he removed it with a screwdriver. There were fresh compression marks in the frame where the metal had pulled against the screws. That was the first physical evidence Dad could not easily blame on me. He asked if I had kicked the door. I hadn't. He asked if Jamie had been there. No. Mom looked at Chester. The dog remained behind the couch. Dad installed a heavier latch. Then he added a hook at the top. For almost 2 months, the door stayed shut. The rest of the house did not. Lights began turning on when nobody was upstairs. My parents would send me to switch them off. I would reach the landing and find the guest room lamp glowing. Sometimes the bathroom light was on too. I became terrified that each trip upstairs would end with an open eave door. Dad started going himself after I refused several times. He never saw the girl. He did see objects moving. Once he left a stack of folded towels on the upstairs landing while repairing the bathroom sink. He went downstairs for a wrench. When he returned, the towels were scattered from my bedroom to the guest room. Dad thought Chester had gone upstairs. Chester was outside with Mom. Another time, Mom placed the laundry basket beside my bedroom door. She came back 10 minutes later. The basket was inside the guest room. Nobody admitted moving it. Despite everything, my parents still resisted calling the house haunted. I understand that now. At 8, their refusal felt cruel. As an adult, I think they were scared of what believing me would mean. They had already lost one child. They had moved because the old house contained too many memories. Now their surviving kid was claiming another child lived inside the walls. My mother once admitted years later that she was afraid I was having some kind of psychological breakdown because of Molly. Dad worried about the same thing. That explained their reactions. It did not excuse all of them. The blonde girl appeared again near my 9th birthday. I was not inside the Eaves that time. I was walking upstairs to get school clothes. The landing was bright. Morning sunlight came through my bedroom window. I reached the top step. She was standing inside the guest room. Not hiding, not partly visible. Standing in the middle of the carpet. She wore the same green dress, same white socks, same dark shoes. She looked slightly taller than I remembered. That bothered me. The first time, she seemed 7 or 8. Now she looked closer to 9, as if she had grown while I did. Several blonde strands on the left side of her head stretched horizontally toward the wall containing the north eave. The rest of her hair hung normally. In one hand, she held my stuffed raccoon. The toy had been missing for months. She looked at me, then toward the guest room access door. It opened. She smiled. I ran downstairs. Dad was in the kitchen. I told him she was there. He grabbed my shoulders. Slow down. She's in the guest room. Dad went upstairs. I followed only as far as the middle of the staircase. He checked the guest room. Empty, the north eave access door was open. My stuffed raccoon sat just inside. Dad brought it down. He stared at the toy. Where was this? I told you. Chris, I told you. He stopped questioning me. That was not the same as believing. But he stopped accusing me. A few weeks later, something happened that changed my relationship with Mom. She was cleaning the guest room. I was downstairs watching television. Dad was at work. I heard Mom scream. Not my name, just one sharp scream. I ran toward the stairs. She came down fast enough that she almost fell. Her face had gone pale. What happened? She looked back up. Nothing, you screamed. I dropped something. What? She would not answer. That night, she slept with my bedroom door open and the hall light on. I asked why. She said she wanted me upstairs instead of on the couch. I asked what she had seen. She told me to go to sleep. Years later, she finally admitted what happened. She had been kneeling beside the guest room bed, pulling storage boxes from underneath. The north eave door was behind her. She heard it open. Mom assumed Dad's new latch had failed. She turned. The blonde girl was lying on her stomach, just inside the crawl space. Only her head and shoulders were visible. Her chin rested on both hands. She was smiling at Mom. The strange strands of hair did not point into the crawl space that time. They pointed toward my bedroom. Mom stared. The girl raised one finger to her lips, then pulled backward into the darkness. Mom ran downstairs. She told nobody because she thought grief and stress were making her hallucinate. That admission came much later. At the time, she continued pretending nothing was happening. That made everything worse. The girl began taking things that belonged to Molly, not constantly. One object every few weeks. A paperback book, a necklace, a small stuffed rabbit, a photograph. Mom would discover something missing. Eventually, Dad would find it upstairs, usually inside one of the eaves. The north side was still worse. The south crawlspace had begun feeling strange, too, but objects rarely appeared there. Dad started checking both every Sunday morning. He told me not to go inside. I didn't need convincing. The oddest discovery was one of Molly's cassette tapes. She used to record songs from the radio. Mom kept several tapes in a box inside the first-floor bedroom closet. One disappeared. Dad found it in the north eave beyond the chimney support. He brought it downstairs. The cassette had been pulled apart. The brown tape inside stretched across several feet of floorboards. No one knew why. Dad threw it away. Mom became furious. That was hers. It was ruined. You could have asked, "What are we doing, Elaine?" I was sitting in the living room and heard everything. Mom said, "I don't know." Dad said, "We cannot keep every object forever." She replied, "That isn't what this is about." Then Dad said something that stayed with me. "Then tell me what this is about." Mom didn't. I think Dad already knew. We were not only dealing with a frightening house, we were dealing with two parents who had never agreed on how to survive their daughter's death. Mom preserved, Dad removed. The thing upstairs seemed to understand exactly which objects could reopen that argument. The direct confrontation happened in January, when I was 9. There had been a snowstorm overnight. School was closed. Dad had already gone to work because his office stayed open. Mom was downstairs doing laundry. I was building a model airplane at the dining room table. Chester slept near the radiator. Around 10:30, I heard music upstairs. Very faint. A melody from a wind-up toy. I recognized it immediately. Molly had owned a small wooden music box shaped like a carousel. It played a slow version of Beautiful Dreamer. After she died, Mom kept it inside her dresser. I had not heard it in years. I walked toward the staircase. The melody continued. Mom was in the basement. The washing machine was running. She could not hear it. I should have called her. Instead, I climbed the stairs. The sound came from my bedroom. The north eave door stood open. The music box sat just inside. Its little wooden horses rotated. I stopped in the doorway. The lid on the music box had to be opened for it to play. It was open. The mechanism slowed. The final notes stretched, then stopped. I took one step closer. Something moved farther inside. I saw green fabric beyond the chimney support. I backed away. The music box started again. Nobody wound it. The wooden horses began circling. I whispered, "Give it back." I do not know why I said that. A child's voice answered from the far half of the eave. "You left everything." I froze. It was the first time I heard her speak. Her voice sounded normal. Young, no echo, no whisper. I said, "That's not yours." She replied, "Neither is the room. I should have run." Instead, I became angry. That house had already taken enough from me. My parents fought. My dog was afraid of the stairs. My toys disappeared. Molly's belongings were being dragged into a filthy crawlspace. I had spent almost 2 years being told I imagined everything. I wanted the music box. I got down on my hands and knees. Chester appeared behind me. I hadn't heard him come upstairs. He stood in my bedroom doorway. Stay, he did not come farther. I entered the north eave. The music box was within reach. I grabbed it. The lid snapped shut. The tune stopped. Then the access door slammed behind me. Total darkness. I yelled. Chester barked outside. I turned and pushed against the access door. It did not move. There was no lock on the inside. Nothing should have held it shut. I hit it with my shoulder. Still closed. The crawl space behind me creaked. I turned on the small flashlight I had carried upstairs earlier while looking for model glue. I don't remember deciding to bring it with me. The beam reached only partway toward the chimney support. The green dress was visible beyond it. The girl stood there. She was taller again, almost my height. The sideways strands of hair pointed toward me. I held the music box against my chest, opened the door. She took one step forward. I crawled backward. The space was too low to stand. She should have been crouching. She wasn't. Her head should have touched the roof. Instead, the sloped ceiling above her looked higher. That was when I noticed the crawl space itself had changed. The timber beside the chimney was farther away than it should have been. My bedroom access door was behind me. The rear guest room access was supposed to be maybe 25 feet away. The girl seemed to stand at least that far from the chimney, with more darkness behind her. The house did not have that much width. I knew it even at 9. She moved again, no sound from her shoes. Her dress did not touch the boards. The blonde strands pointing toward me tightened almost perfectly straight. Then she reached out. I threw the music box. It hit the floor between us. The lid opened. Music started. The girl looked down. I turned toward the access door and kicked it. Chester barked harder. Mom shouted from downstairs. "Chris?" I screamed. The door opened maybe half an inch. Then something grabbed the back of my ankle. A hand, small fingers, warm skin. I was pulled away from the access door so quickly that my elbows scraped across the boards. I screamed again. The flashlight rolled, its beam turned sideways. The girl held my ankle with one hand. Her face was calm. The other hand touched the music box. The tune slowed. I kicked. My free foot struck her shoulder. She moved backward slightly. Her fingers tightened. Pain shot around my ankle. Then I saw something behind her. Not another person. A narrow opening in the far wall. There had never been an opening there. It looked like a vertical gap between two unfinished boards. Complete darkness inside. The girl was pulling me toward it. I grabbed a roof support. My fingernails tore. She pulled again. The support creaked. I remember screaming for Mom. Then Chester forced himself into the eave. I heard his claws behind me. He had refused to cross the threshold for months. That morning he came in. He crawled until his chest pressed against my legs. Then he bit the back of my pajama pants. Not my skin. The fabric. He pulled in the opposite direction. For several seconds, I was between the dog and the girl. My pants tore at the knee. Chester growled. The blonde girl turned toward him. Her smile disappeared. The sideways strands of hair suddenly pointed toward Chester. He let go of my pants and barked directly into her face. She struck him. I saw the movement. One small hand against the side of his head. The impact knocked him into the inner wall. Chester yelped. Something in me changed. I kicked her again. Hard, her grip loosened. I crawled toward Chester. The access door behind us flew open. Mom was on the other side. She grabbed my wrists. "Come here." I crawled. Something caught my pajama leg again. Mom pulled. The fabric ripped almost to my thigh. Chester scrambled toward the doorway. Mom dragged me out. I turned once. The girl was only a few feet inside. For the first time, her expression looked angry. The strands of hair that usually pointed in one direction were spread around her head now. Each one stretched toward a different part of the crawl space. Then the access door slammed. Mom fell backward with me. Chester came out after us. He had a cut near his left ear. My ankle was already bruising. There were 4 red finger marks around it. The skin on both elbows had been scraped raw. My pajama pants were torn. Mom stared at me, then at Chester, then at the closed access door. She asked one question. "Did she touch you?" I stopped crying for a second. "You saw her?" Mom's face collapsed. She hugged me. That was the first time anyone in my family admitted I had been telling the truth. Dad came home early. Mom told him everything. At first, he thought she meant she had seen me being pulled by something inside the eave. Then she said, "I saw the child." Dad sat at the kitchen table. He looked older than he had that morning. He inspected my ankle. He photographed the bruises. He photographed the torn pants. He took pictures of Chester's cut. Then, he went upstairs with a hammer, pry bar, measuring tape, and work light. He did not let me follow. Mom stayed downstairs with me. Dad spent almost an hour checking the north crawl space. When he came back, his face had changed. He placed something on the kitchen table, my red plastic building block, the one the girl had offered me nearly 2 years earlier. The chewed corner was still there. Dad had found it beyond the chimney support. Next to it was Molly's music box. The box was damaged. One wooden horse had broken off. The mechanism no longer played. Dad also found 4 long scratches in the plywood floor. They began near where I said the girl grabbed me and ran toward the inner wall. The scratches were narrow, parallel, too shallow to be tool marks. Dad thought they might have come from Chester's claws. Then he showed us another photograph. A child's handprint had been pressed into dust on one of the vertical rafters. Not mine. The print was smaller. Dad measured it. The palm was barely over 2 inches across. What bothered him most was the location. It was more than 4 feet above the crawl space floor. The roof there was only about 3 feet high. No child could stand upright and place a hand at that height without pressing through the roof. Dad sealed the north eave that afternoon, not just the access door in my bedroom, both ends. He cut plywood larger than each opening and screwed it directly into the wall studs. Then he placed heavy furniture in front. The south eave stayed accessible because we needed storage. Nothing happened for almost 3 months. I moved back into my bedroom. Chester eventually came upstairs again, but he refused to enter the guest room. My parents stopped blaming me. That should have made things easier. Instead, I became angry about the years they had not believed me. Mom apologized. Dad tried. He was not good at apologies. One evening, while helping me with homework, he said, "I thought I was protecting you by not making it real." I asked, "How did that protect me?" He had no answer. The experience also changed how my parents talked about Molly. Mom started packing some of her belongings for donation. Not all, just some. Dad stopped trying to rush her. For the first time, I heard them discuss my sister without arguing. That part of our family actually improved. Then, the south eave began opening. The first event was small. A cardboard box appeared in the middle of the landing. It had been stored behind the southern knee wall. Dad assumed he had left it out. Then an old toy appeared on my bed. Not mine, not Molly's. A wooden spinning top, faded blue paint. Nobody in the family recognized it. Dad put it in the trash. The following morning, it was on the dining room table. He threw it away outside. 3 days later, it sat on the upstairs landing. That was when Dad started talking seriously about moving. Mom did not argue. We listed the house that summer. I was 10 by the time it sold. The final months were relatively quiet. We never reopened the north eave. The plywood remained screwed across both entrances. The south access doors sometimes shifted overnight, but nobody saw the blonde girl again. At least nobody told me they did. We moved into a newer home closer to Dad's work. No crawl spaces, no knee wall doors, no attic large enough to enter. The first night there, I slept better than I had in years. I thought the story was over. 6 days after we moved, the people who bought our old house called. Their names were Mark and Denise Rowan. They had a 7-year-old daughter named Sophie and a baby boy. Dad answered. I was in the kitchen eating cereal. His tone changed during the conversation. At first, he sounded friendly. Then, confused. Then, very still. When he hung up, Mom asked what happened. Dad said, They asked if we ever had trouble upstairs. Nobody spoke. Mom put down her coffee cup. What kind of trouble? Dad looked at me. Their daughter says there's another little girl in the house. I felt sick. Mom asked what she looked like. Dad did not want to say. Mom insisted. Blonde, green dress. Sophie said the child lived behind the upstairs wall. The Rowans had removed some of the plywood because they wanted to use the eaves for storage. Their daughter had apparently been sitting on the landing talking to someone. When Denise asked who, Sophie said, "My new friend." Dad called Mark back that evening. For the first time, he told someone outside our family almost everything. He left out Molly at first. He did not leave out the bruises, Chester's injury, or the handprint. Mark listened. Then he laughed. Not cruelly. Nervously, he said children imagine things. Dad said he had once believed the same thing. That conversation should have been enough for the Rowans to reseal the eaves. They did not. I cannot blame them completely. If somebody had told my parents a ghost story when we bought the place, Dad probably would have laughed too. For several months, we heard nothing. Then, Denise called Mom. Sophie was losing toys. They found them inside the north eave. Mark blamed her. Sophie insisted the blonde girl took them. Mom told Denise not to punish her. That became the beginning of a strange relationship between our families. We did not become friends. We exchanged occasional phone calls, mostly when something happened in the house. Sophie called the girl Annie. That was not a name I had ever heard. I asked why. Denise said Sophie claimed the girl told her. The name meant nothing to my parents. It meant nothing to me. At first, Sophie seemed to like her. That was different from my experience. I had been terrified immediately. Sophie treated Annie like a playmate. She drew pictures of the two of them in the upstairs rooms. She left snacks near the access door. She said Annie did not like adults going into the eaves. Mark thought his daughter had created an imaginary friend after moving away from her previous neighborhood. Denise became less certain. One afternoon, she entered Sophie's room and found two children sitting on the floor. She saw the second child only from behind. Blonde hair, green dress. The girls appeared to be arranging plastic animals in a circle. Denise said, "Sophie?" The blonde child turned. Denise saw her face for perhaps 1 second. Normal child, small nose, light eyebrows, a faint smile. Then Denise noticed several strands of hair stretching perfectly sideways toward the north wall. She screamed. Mark came upstairs. Only Sophie remained. The plastic animals were arranged on the floor. One of them did not belong to Sophie, a small ceramic horse. When Mom told me that, I stopped breathing. Molly's ceramic horse had disappeared before we moved. My parents thought it had been packed incorrectly. Denise described it perfectly. White body, blue painted saddle, tiny chip on one ear. Mom asked them to return it. Mark did. He drove to our new house and handed it to Dad. I watched from the living room. Dad put the horse on the dining table. No one touched it for hours. That night, Mom locked it inside a metal file cabinet in Dad's office. In the morning, the cabinet was still locked. The horse was gone. We never found it again. That was the only unexplained event that happened in our new house for many years. Back at the old property, things became worse. Sophie started waking at night. She told her parents Annie wanted her to sleep upstairs on the landing. Mark removed the access doors and screwed plywood over the openings. According to Denise, Sophie became hysterical, not normal disappointment. She screamed until she lost her voice. She tried to remove the screws with a butter knife. That frightened Denise. They took Sophie to a pediatrician. Then, a therapist. The therapist thought the imaginary friend had become part of the child's adjustment problems. That was reasonable. Mark latched on to that explanation. Denise did not. The marriage began suffering. We heard only pieces. Mark thought Denise was encouraging Sophie's fears. Denise thought Mark was refusing to see what was happening. Sophie stopped sleeping in her bedroom. Objects moved around the house. The north eave plywood developed scratches from the inside. A new latch on the south side bent. Mark accused Sophie of damaging things. Denise started photographing everything. One picture showed a small, bare footprint in a layer of dust inside the sealed north eave. Another showed a toy teacup on top of a roof support too high for Sophie to reach inside the low crawl space. The strangest picture arrived in the mail. This was before texting photographs became normal. Denise had printed it. The image showed their living room. Sophie sat on the couch watching television. Nothing unusual at first. Then I noticed her lap. The blonde girl's head rested there. Not a transparent face, not a blur. A completely normal-looking child's head turned sideways. Blonde hair spread across Sophie's legs. The body was not visible, only the head and part of one shoulder. Several strands of hair stretched away from the face and disappeared behind the couch cushion. Mom looked at the photograph for a long time. Dad refused to keep it. He mailed it back. The Rowans began researching the property. I need to be careful here because this is the part people hear and immediately decide it explains everything. It doesn't. They did not find a newspaper article saying a blonde child died in the Eaves. There was no murder confession hidden in a wall, no convenient story matching every detail. They found old census records and property documents. The house had belonged to several families. One owner during the 1930s was a widow named Frances Bell, who worked from home doing alterations and dressmaking. She had no children listed on census records. A local historical society had several photographs from neighborhood events. One image showed Frances standing on our old front porch with 3 other women. A blonde child stood near the railing. She wore a dark dress. The picture was black and white, so nobody knew its actual color. She might have been a niece, a neighbor, a customer's daughter. There was no name written on the photograph. The face resembled the girl I had seen. That is all I can honestly say. The image did not prove anything. Sophie called her Annie. No Annie appeared in the property records the Rowans found. Denise became convinced the photograph was connected. Mark thought she was becoming obsessed. That disagreement eventually destroyed their marriage. Denise moved out with both children. Mark stayed. He said selling would mean admitting that a child's imagination had ruined his family. Sophie refused to return. For several years, we heard almost nothing. I went through high school. Then college. My parents eventually lost contact with Denise. The old house became something we mentioned rarely. Chester died when I was 17. He lived a long life. On his final day, I sat with him on the floor of the veterinarian's office. I remembered the morning he crawled into the north eave after me. I felt guilty that I had dragged him upstairs in the first place. He had known before I did. Whatever people say about animals sensing things, I know only this. That dog would jump into lakes, chase deer, and once tried to fight a running lawnmower. He would not step onto our upstairs landing when that access door moved. When he died, I was there. That mattered to me because of Molly. Because of all the times I had wondered whether leaving someone alone at the end was a kind of betrayal. Years later, my mother told me I had become obsessed with goodbyes after my sister died. I think she was right. Maybe that is why the old house stayed in my mind. I never felt as though I properly left it. I escaped. That is different. When I was 24, Dad called me. Mark Rowan was dead. I hadn't heard the name in years. At first, I thought Dad meant illness. Then, he told me Mark had taken his own life inside the old house. I will not describe how. The details are not important to this story. He had apparently been living there alone for some time. Neighbors said he became increasingly isolated. Denise had tried to convince him to sell. He refused. There was no note explaining the house. No final confession about a blonde child. He had been dealing with depression, financial problems, and the collapse of his family. Those things matter. I do not claim a haunting killed him. That would be irresponsible. I do know what happened afterward. Denise contacted my mother. She needed to clear some belongings from the property before it went to the bank. She did not want to enter alone. Mom asked whether I would go with her. I said no. Then I changed my mind. Part of me wanted to see the place as an adult. I thought being older would reduce it. Turn the house back into lumber, drywall, shingles, and old insulation. Maybe I wanted proof that childhood had exaggerated everything. Mom and I drove there on a cloudy Saturday in October. I had not been inside for 14 years. The neighborhood looked smaller. The maple in the front yard was enormous. The siding had been replaced. The porch railing was different. Inside, I recognized everything immediately. Same staircase, same dining room, same view into the kitchen. The smell had changed. No dog, no mom cooking, no dad's coffee. Still, the proportions triggered old memories before I consciously recognized them. Denise was already there. She looked exhausted. Sophie was 21 by then and refused to come. Her younger brother had no interest either. Denise hugged Mom. Then she looked at me. You got out. It was an odd thing to say. I asked how Sophie was. Fine. Does she remember? Everything. We did not discuss it further. Most of Mark's belongings were already packed. We stayed downstairs for almost an hour. Eventually, Denise said there were boxes upstairs she needed. My body reacted immediately. My hands became cold. I was 24. I hated that an old staircase could still do that to me. Mom touched my arm. You don't have to. I went anyway. The upstairs landing looked different. The carpet had been removed. Bare hardwood now. My old bedroom was painted dark blue. Sophie's old room at the rear had pink walls covered with pale rectangles where posters had been. The south eave access had been replaced with a larger door. The north side was different. Mark had opened it completely. The small access door was gone. So was Dad's plywood. The knee wall had been cut away from floor to ceiling across a section almost 4 feet wide. A normal adult could step into the storage area without crawling immediately. Denise stopped at the opening. I haven't been in there. Mom asked why Mark removed the wall. He said he wanted to prove what was inside. Did he? Denise looked at the darkness. No, we used flashlights. The eaves seemed smaller than I remembered. That should have comforted me. The chimney support was still there, the same wide vertical timber. I could see it from the opening. The floorboards had been covered with newer plywood. Mark had installed electric lights along the crawlspace ceiling. Denise found the switch. 3 bare bulbs came on. The far end remained dim. I stayed outside. Mom and Denise stepped in. They could stand only near the opening. After several feet, the roof forced them down. I heard Mom say, "Oh my God." I went closer. What? She pointed at the inner wall. There were pencil marks, dozens, height marks, like parents used to record children growing. Dates had been written beside some. Sophie 7, Sophie 8, Sophie 9. Those made sense. Then others. Chris 8, Chris 9. My name, my ages. The writing did not belong to either of my parents. Dad had never measured me inside the eave. Mom touched one mark. Her hand shook. There were older markings beneath those. Faded, some had been painted over. Names we did not recognize. A few dates went back decades. One line near the chimney had no name, only 10 today. Denise said Sophie turned 10 shortly before they moved out. I stepped inside. Every part of me wanted to leave. I kept going. Near the chimney support, I found scratches in the newer plywood. 4 narrow lines. Parallel, just like the ones Dad photographed after the girl grabbed me. I crouched. Something red was wedged between the plywood and the wall. I pulled it free. A plastic building block. My block. A chewed corner. I dropped it. Mom made a small sound behind me. Denise started crying. None of us wanted to continue. Then a toy rolled from deeper inside. A small wooden spinning top. Faded blue. The same one Dad had thrown away when I was a child. It rolled in a slow circle. Then stopped. Nobody touched it. I backed toward the opening. From behind the chimney support came a child's voice. Chris, I had not heard that voice in 14 years. My knees nearly gave out. Mom whispered, "No." Denise covered her mouth. The blonde girl crawled into view. She had not aged. That was the first thing I noticed. She looked 8 or 9 again. Green dress. White socks. Dark shoes. Same mild expression. Same blonde hair. Several strands stretched sideways toward the dark space behind her. My adult brain noticed more than my child's brain had. The strands did not simply float. Each one remained perfectly straight from her head until it disappeared into darkness, almost like fine thread under tension. The girl looked at me, then at Mom. My mother said, "I'm sorry." I didn't know whether she meant to me or to the child. The girl crawled closer. Denise stepped backward. Mom grabbed my sleeve. I couldn't move. The child stopped beside the old chimney support. She placed one hand on the floor. Her fingers looked normal. Then she smiled. "You came back." I heard Molly's name behind me. Not from the girl, from Mom. She whispered it. The blonde child's face changed, only slightly. The smile disappeared. Her head turned toward my mother. Mom took one step forward. "Where are her things?" The question shocked me. I grabbed her arm. "Mom," she pulled free. "Where are Molly's things?" The child looked toward the darkness behind the chimney. Then she crawled backward. Mom followed. I stopped her. "What are you doing? I need to know." "No, Chris, no." I was angry in exactly the way I had been at 9. The house had used Molly's belongings to tear at us for years. Now Mom was ready to crawl after it because grief still knew where to pull. I told her we were leaving. Denise agreed. Then something moved behind us. The opening in the knee wall closed. Not a door. There was no door anymore. A large sheet of plywood that had been leaning against the opposite wall fell across the opening. It should not have fit. It covered the gap almost completely. The 3 of us were inside. Denise screamed. We pushed against the plywood. It would not move. Something had braced it from the other side. The electric bulbs flickered. The blonde girl was gone. I could hear movement deeper in the eave. Soft crawling. Several directions. Mom said my name. I told both women to stay near the opening. I tried kicking the plywood. Nothing. Then one bulb went out. The farthest one. The second dimmed. The crawl space beyond the chimney changed. I saw it happen. The far wall seemed to recede. The distance stretched. Roof supports that should have been 3 feet apart now continued in a line far beyond the dimensions of the house. Denise whispered, "What is that?" I had no answer. Something small ran through the darkness, not toward us, across, left to right. Then another movement followed from the opposite direction. The girl appeared near the chimney. She was standing upright. The roof above her was now high enough. Behind her was a corridor that could not exist. Dozens of objects lay along the floor. Toys, shoes, books, clothing, things from different decades. I recognized some: my stuffed raccoon, Molly's cassette case, the ceramic horse, a baseball glove, Sophie's plastic animals. There were things much older: wooden blocks, a metal lunch pail, a child's leather boot. The girl reached toward Mom. Mom began moving. I grabbed her. She fought me. That's Molly's rabbit. I looked. The stuffed rabbit lay near the girl's feet. Mom had kept it after Molly died. It disappeared from our old house before we moved. The blonde child lifted it. Mom made a sound I had never heard from her. She took another step. I held her harder. That's not Molly. I know. Then leave it. I know. She was crying. The girl moved backward, taking the rabbit with her. Mom almost followed. Denise grabbed her other arm. The plywood behind us shook. Someone outside was moving it. We heard a man shout. A contractor Denise had hired had arrived early. The plywood shifted. The opening appeared. Light from the landing came through. Go, I said. Denise crawled out first. Mom followed. Something caught my ankle. The exact same place as when I was 9. Small fingers. Warm, I hit the floor. Mom screamed my name. I was pulled backward. I grabbed the edge of the opening. My fingernails scraped across hardwood. Denise grabbed one arm. Mom grabbed the other. The blonde girl had both hands around my ankle now. She looked calm. Her hair strands stretched behind her into the impossible corridor. She pulled. Pain shot through my knee. I kicked with my free foot. She moved aside. Then something else grabbed my shoe from deeper darkness. I couldn't see what. Another small hand. Then another. 3 sets. The contractor outside grabbed my jacket. All 4 adults pulled. My shoe came off. The hands disappeared with it. I came through the opening so fast that my shoulder hit the opposite wall. The contractor helped me stand. He asked what was in there. Nobody answered. The plywood fell flat. The electric lights inside went out. We left the house immediately. The contractor thought there might be animals inside the wall. Denise told him not to enter. He listened because she was the owner. The next morning, police were called because Denise found damage and wanted a record before the bank took possession. They found the missing shoe inside the north eave. It was near the chimney support. There were bruises around my ankle. 6 distinct finger-shaped marks. Not 4 like when I was a child. 6. My jacket sleeve had torn where Mom pulled me. The plywood that had blocked the opening was still on the landing. The contractor measured it. It was wider than the opening. There was no way it could have passed through from inside the eave. No one could explain how it had ended up across the gap. The objects we saw beyond the chimney were gone. Most of them. The red building block remained. So did the blue spinning top. Police photographed both because Denise insisted. The height marks remained on the inner wall. My mother saw them again in daylight. She touched the line beside Chris 9. Then she apologized to me. Not for that day. For childhood. I knew after the guest room, she said. You saw her. Yes, and you still let Dad blame me. She started crying. I was afraid. So was I. I thought if I said it out loud, then she was real. I understood. I was still angry. Both things could be true. Mom and I repaired something between us that day. Not completely. Enough, the bank eventually sold the property. I do not know who bought it. I stopped checking. Denise moved away. Sophie eventually became a nurse. I know that because Mom stayed in occasional contact. Sophie never went back to the house. She refused even after Mark died. According to Denise, Sophie remembered the blonde girl differently from me. She had never been afraid during the first years. Annie played games, found lost toys, sat beside her at night. Only after her parents began trying to separate them did the child become aggressive. Sophie once told her mother something that bothered me. She doesn't like when families take children away. Denise asked what that meant. Sophie would not explain. I have never decided whether the blonde girl was the spirit of a child. I don't know if Annie was her name. I don't know whether the old photograph had anything to do with her. Maybe the dressmaker who lived there mattered. Maybe she didn't. Maybe hundreds of children wore similar clothes. Maybe the photograph looked familiar because we wanted it to. I am comfortable saying I don't know. What I cannot dismiss is the physical evidence. The bent latch, the scratches in the plywood, Chester's injury, my bruises, the torn clothing, the red block Dad found years after I lost it, the ceramic horse that moved between families, the names marked inside the wall, the contractor who saw that sheet of plywood where it could not have fit. Those things existed outside my memory. My parents touched them. Other adults photographed them. That does not prove a ghost. It proves something happened. For a long time, that was enough. I am 40 now. My father died 6 years ago from cancer. Mom lived alone afterward. We talked more during her final years than we ever had when I was younger. One evening, she brought up the old house without me asking. She said there was one thing she had never told me. The day we moved out, after the truck left, she went upstairs alone. Dad was signing paperwork outside. I was already in the car. Mom wanted to check every room one last time. The north eave openings were still sealed. She stood in my empty bedroom. Then she heard Molly laugh. Not the blonde girl. Molly, my mother's exact words were, "I knew my child's laugh." She walked toward the sealed access. Something knocked gently from inside. Mom did not open it. She said, "Goodbye, Molly." Then a girl's voice answered, "She's not here." Mom ran. She kept that from me for 30 years. I asked why. She finally told me. She said because she was tired of protecting me from things I had already survived. Mom died the following spring. After the funeral, I cleared her apartment. Most of her belongings were ordinary. Clothes, books, photographs, kitchenware. One box contained things she had kept from our childhood. Molly's school records, my old drawings, Chester's collar, Dad's photographs of the damage in the eave, the picture of the tiny handprint, my torn pajama pants. Mom had kept everything. At the bottom was a small cardboard box taped shut. My name was written on it. I opened it. Inside was the red building block. I stared at it for a long time. I thought police had kept it after Mark's house was searched. Apparently not. There was also a folded note from Mom. She had written only, "I found this in my coat pocket the day we left Denise's house. I never put it there. I kept the block. I almost threw it away several times. I couldn't. That probably sounds foolish after everything I just described. Grief makes people keep strange objects. So does fear. I have a daughter now. Her name is Lucy. She is 7. We live in a modern 2-story house with no crawl spaces behind the bedroom walls. That mattered to me when we bought it. Our attic is accessed through a ceiling hatch in the garage. Lucy has never been up there. Until 3 weeks ago, I had never told her anything about the Massachusetts house. One Saturday morning, she came into the kitchen carrying a red plastic building block. My block. The chewed corner was unmistakable. I had kept it inside a locked drawer in my office. I asked where she found it. She said, "In my room." I checked the drawer, still locked. The small cardboard box inside was empty. I asked Lucy who gave her the block. She shrugged. "The girl." My wife looked at me. I could barely speak. "What girl?" Lucy said a child had been sitting beside her bed before breakfast. I asked what she looked like. "Yellow hair." "What was she wearing?" Lucy thought for a moment. a green dress. I stopped asking questions. My wife had never heard the story. She thought Lucy had seen a picture somewhere. That is possible. Children overhear things. They build stories from fragments. I took the block away and put it in the garage. That night, Lucy woke screaming. We ran into her bedroom. Nobody was there. Her window was locked. Closet empty. No marks on the floor. She said the girl had been angry because I took the toy. I sat with Lucy until she fell asleep. The following morning, the block was back on her nightstand. I threw it into a dumpster behind my office building. Not our trash. A dumpster 15 miles from home. I watched it fall underneath several black garbage bags. I drove away. 2 days passed. Nothing happened. Then yesterday morning, my wife called me upstairs. Lucy was at school. My wife had been changing the sheets. Something had been underneath the mattress. The red block. Beside it were 4 blonde hairs. They were not Lucy's. My daughter has dark brown hair. I picked one up with tweezers. It was about 8 inches long. For most of its length, it looked completely normal. Near the end, it bent sharply sideways and stayed that way even when I held it vertically. Last night, I put all 4 strands into a clear plastic evidence bag and locked them in my desk. This morning, the bag was still there. The hairs were gone. At breakfast, Lucy asked why I looked tired. I told her I hadn't slept well. She ate cereal for a while. Then she said, very casually, she says you used to crawl faster. I asked what she meant. Lucy pointed toward the wall beside the stairs. There is no room behind that wall. Then she smiled and said, she wants to know if you still have the dog.